Are we on?
Where are we on now? Are we on? Hello?
Yeah,
Testing? One. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 17th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. Mr. Draymond, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
I'd be happy to. If you'd all please stand and place your right hand over your heart and join me in saluting our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for the invocation.
Another minister friend of mine sent me a collection of prayers. I'll read you just one of them. Let us pray. Dear God, we need your loving arms to enfold us, your strong hand to guide us, your spirit to enlighten us. With hubris or pride, we tend to hold fast to that which we have made of ourselves rather than becoming what you would have us be. Forgive our waywardness and set our feet on paths of righteousness. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer and give us the courage to lead. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. That Pastor Skip Lindeman from the Congregational Church of La Cañada. Mr. Kasakian, may we have your report?
Your presentation and appointments. At 3A is the agenda preview for the meetings of August 24, 2010.
Do you need to read the part about posting the agenda?
I'm sorry. The agenda for the August 17, 20. It's a special day. I got a little ahead of myself.
I'm fine. I'm just saying.
The agenda for the August 17, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council is posted on Thursday, August 12, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. The next item?
Next item is presentation and appointments. At 3A is the agenda preview for the meetings of August 24, 2010.
Ms. Beers.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, for August 24th, there's one actually business agenda item for the Glendale Housing Authority. Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing, implementation of various housing authority program enhancements and a new program development in support of affordable housing for veterans. In the afternoon, for the Glendale Redevelopment Agency, there are no business agenda items. For the joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency, you have one item before you: Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing, Community Planning, Community Services and Parks, and Libraries regarding Glendale Urban Art Program. That evening at 6 p.m. for the Glendale City Council meeting, we have a few consent items: General Manager of Glendale Water and Power, main steam piping stress analysis condition assessments, and non-destructive examinations for the Grayson Power Plant. Director of Community Planning, Public Works, and Community Services and Parks. This is Sustainable Communities Planning Grant and Incentives Program grant request. Under action items, we have a number of items: Director of Public Works, public sale of surplus city-owned property at 1338 North Jackson Street through a public auction. Director of Human Resources, this is a resolution of the City of Glendale providing for the establishment of classification titles and compensation for employees of the City of Glendale. City Manager, this is regarding Path Achieve co-sponsorship. And lastly, City Clerk, regarding legal advertising contract for the City of Glendale in connection with specification number 2054. That concludes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. As a bit of a preamble to a reporting out in action I anticipate you'll take here momentarily, let me make a few comments. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that we were bidding farewell to a gentleman who had dedicated 33 years of his career to serving the residents of Glendale and providing really tremendous leadership to the Glendale organization and giving even more to the community as he volunteered and engaged in the life of Glendale, and that was Bob McFall. It wasn't that long ago, and I'll say he as yet has not cleaned out his office, but we recognize that we do need to move on, and as I've been fond of saying, as really good people have moved on, whether retired or on to other careers from Glendale, these people can never be fully replaced. But Glendale, because of its quality, will continue to attract and retain really good quality people to serve the community and provide leadership in the organization. And it's in that regard that I think we are blessed as an organization. Many cities strive to nurture and develop people in-house so they can move into positions of responsibility and leadership. And we have just such a person in our ranks to step up to the responsibility of assistant city manager. She has prepared herself academically. She has prepared herself professionally. She knows the organization. She was literally born and bred here, figuratively, but almost virtually. She lives in the community. She's respected throughout the organization. She's already engaged in the community. And I frankly feel blessed that we have someone here that has worked with me for the past 10 years and who is uniquely qualified to step up to assume the responsibilities of assistant city manager, and that's Yasmin Beers. And it is with that that I take the great pleasure of asking for your approval in my appointment of Yasmin as assistant city manager.
So moved.
Second.
We actually have a motion here, I think.
Okay, we do have formal language. Let me invite Council Member Friedman to read it into the record.
It is my pleasure and honor to move that Yasmin Beers, that the council, acting pursuant to Glendale Charter Article 1X9, Section 4, and Government Code Section 54957.1A5, hereby approves the selection by the city manager of Yasmin Beers as the assistant city manager for the city of Glendale.
Second.
Second by Mr. Weaver. Let's take roll call.
Council members Freeman,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes.
Now you can relax.
Ms. Beers, congratulations. And I invite you to say a few words and introduce your family members and friends that are here, and then we'll get a chance to comment.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, first and foremost, I want to thank you for the vote of confidence this evening. Thank you, Mr. Starbird, for bringing forward the appointment. I truly appreciate it. I'm very honored and very excited to have the opportunity to be the Assistant City Manager for the City of Glendale. I've been very blessed to have the opportunity to grow in an organization such as this. The city's values and commitment to service that we have to basically do the work that we do for the 207,000 plus community members is really exceptional, and I'm proud to be a public servant in this community. I've worked for the city for 23 years. I started when I was 17 years old at the library. You can do the math. Yes, I'm 39. For a few more months at least.
How many years?
And I hope to continue my career here with the City of Glendale for many years to come. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with many dedicated professionals within this organization, and there are too many to name this evening, but I have to name a couple, if you would allow me. These two individuals have served as role models for me. They've been mentors, and their openness and their guidance in the last 10 and a half years that I've been in the Management Services Office has been tremendous. And that's Bob McFall for giving me the opportunity to serve as a Deputy City Manager, and Mr. Starbird for believing in me and bringing the appointment forward today. So I appreciate both you gentlemen very, very much. Thank you for everything that you've done for me. I'm almost done, I promise. My city family, my colleagues who are here this evening, those who were unable to make it, to all of you, thank you for your tremendous support through the years, especially in the last 6 or 7 months. You have all been very, very wonderful and an inspiration to me, so thank you all. The City Manager's Office, the staff, you guys work tireless hours, and you're so dedicated, and you're the best professionals anyone could hope to work with. So thank you for all that you do on a daily basis. I really appreciate everything that you do. The executive team, there are some of you here this evening. Some of you have been my sounding board, and you have been tremendous individuals to have on a team. Thank you for everything that you do. Nobody could ask for a better team to work with other than the executive team that we have in place. You are truly tremendous individuals, dedicated professionals, and I'm proud to serve with you. There's a few Seroptimus members here this evening. Complete surprise to me. I had no idea. Thank you, Teresa and Diane and Nancy, for coming this evening. You guys are wonderful. So my Seroptimus family for their support. Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to thank my family, of course. My father and mother. Jim said, "Don't cry," and I'm not going to. But for their dedication to their two kids, myself and my sister. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for everything. My sister, who's always been there for me through good times and bad times. Thank you, sis, Rebecca Camria. And of course, my husband and my two children, Dan and Sophia and Bijan. Their support of me, I couldn't do this without their support. Thank you to them. Ani, who is the second grandmother in the family, she takes care of the kids, and the kids love her, and she truly is the second grandma in our family. And Ani, thank you for everything that you do. My two brothers who are here this evening, they're not biological brothers, but they're like biological brothers to me. Paul Lopez and Bill Williams, who are my brothers that I've never had. So thank you for all of your support, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I just want to thank you again, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, and I truly hope that I exceed your expectations, and I will do my best to fulfill my responsibilities as Assistant City Manager.
Thank you very much. Colleagues? I know all of us have comments to make, so let's just go around the horn, starting with Mr. Weaver.
Oh, yes. I remember when 10-some years ago, when they said they were bringing somebody new in to be a deputy, Yasmin. And I said, who? Somebody from the library. She comes highly recommended. I didn't know her at all, anything about her, and I wondered how you would fit in. It's been interesting. You know, I'm here just about every day, last 10 years. It's been interesting to see your development. I don't think this city could have made a better choice, Mr. Starbird, and recommended you. You relate good to all the departments, and that's very important. Have somebody like Bob McFall follow him that is a people person and knows the staff and how to work with him. You know where all the skeletons in the closet are, so beware of those of you that have crossed Yasmin. She will be watching you very closely now. Shaking your head, no, I'm just kidding. But it'll be great to have you in there. I know you can relax now. Your stress is shown for the last few days, weeks. It's all over now, so I hope your family, some of you, will stick around and take her to dinner if we can finish this council meeting in an expeditious manner.
I do want to note, Mr. Weaver, she can't relax too much. She's still on probation now.
And she's no longer civil service. She now serves at will. She had to give up that protection. So go do it, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Draymond.
Well, let's see. About 10 years ago, I found myself in the position of inheriting a place on the board of the Montrose Shopping Park Association, and my first big assignment of that board was run down to the City Hall and see if you can find out why there's a particular policy about blah, 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 blah. Well, I didn't really know a soul down here 10 years ago, so that was my first foray. I came down to the city, and I met Yasmin Beers, and she was the person that first met with me and gave me some guidance and said to me, well, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm going to find out. She came back to me not long after that and said, well, I talked to the city manager, and we still don't know the answer to your question, but we're going to find out. And by God, they did. They gave us answer, direction, advice, and that was part of my understanding at that time of how city government can actually benefit the people in this community. Since then, I've been very fortunate to sit on this council for a couple of years, and I've come to rely on you, Yasmin, as not just a colleague, but as a friend, and I greatly appreciate you and the hard work that you put in. You are respected by this council, and you're respected for your diligence and your work ethic and your professionalism, and something more, folks, that we don't often talk about in municipal government, and that's your kindness and your thoughtfulness. You're respected for that, too, and those are important qualities as well. So congratulations to you We're thrilled for you, and it's a promotion well deserved.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman.
Thanks, Will. We have a lot of really wonderful public servants, employees of the city of Glendale, and really a lot of that credit comes from the top down, from Jim Starwood and from Yasmin Beers. And since I've been here, which has only been about a year and a half, although I think council years are a little like dog years. feels like a lot longer somehow, but in a good way. I've gotten to know Yasmin, who I didn't know at all before, and come to think of her as a friend, a peer, and someone that I turn to with a whole host of problems and issues every single day. So I'm very glad that you will be stepping up into this role. You've been doing it, and I think that you will be wonderful in this job, and the city is, I believe, lucky to have you. So congratulations.
Mr. Quintero.
Yasmin, we've been working together for 10 years now, so if she thinks that's a long time, it seems like 25. But no, it's been a real pleasure working with you throughout the years. You're very, very professional. If you don't have the answer, you make sure that you find out what the answer is, no matter what it takes. So I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. I think really you're doing pretty much, obviously you've increased your workload, but you're going to be doing pretty much what you've been doing for these past few years, so it's nothing new. So congratulations to you, but I especially want to congratulate your mom and dad. Having known your dad for a number of years and having talked to him in the past, I know how difficult it was. Now he's an American, but I know how difficult it was to come to this country and literally to start all over again, and especially the achievements that he had accomplished in Iran. And he came here with his two daughters, started from scratch, and tonight one of them is obviously a very, very successful person. So congratulations to your parents. And your little kids don't know what's happening, but,
Or do they care?
but they seem mildly interested. And of course, your wonderful husband, he's been a strong parent all this time, so he'll continue in that role. But congratulations to you.
Thank you. Yasmin, I obviously support and agree with everything that my colleagues have said. It is great to have you step up to this new level of responsibility. The bottom line is that we're looking at you to assist Mr. Starbird, who advises us, the council, in running the city of Glendale in the absolute best and most efficient manner possible. Not just efficiency, but also with the tenderness that government must show to its residents in many of the issues that we face. And we know that you have been tutored well by Mr. McFall. He's got some big shoes to fill. He'll have a big office to fill once he moves out of it. Just kidding. I'm not sure you're getting that office. I think I might take dibs on it. But thank you for making Glendale your home. Thank you for being so supportive in every role that you've played throughout the city. We look forward to helping you grow and become even a greater professional than you already are. You'll get a honeymoon period, a week or two,
Yeah, about that
gentlemen,
long.
ladies.
It's about that long.
And after the honeymoon is over, I know that you will expect from us and demand that we create open lines of communication with you and both compliment you on the things you're doing great, but also discuss some of the issues, some of the difficult issues that we face as a city. And I know you look forward to that challenge and will relish it as the weeks and months come through. So I don't know what else there is to be said. Yes, I do. We should have something better than this, but due to budget constraints, I am going to formally place in the name holder of Ms. Yasmin Beers and remove the current title of Deputy City Manager and replace it with the gold-plated Assistant city manager designation and title.
Then we got to get this meeting over with so you can go to dinner.
Is there a motion to excuse Ms. Beers from further proceedings of this city
Well, yeah,
council?
we could do that, couldn't we? Yeah, she had to go.
So moved.
And with no objection, you are excused.
Early
Enjoy
dinner.
the evening with your family, Yasmin. Thank you.
Early dinner. I forgot about that. We could do that.
And in case you think you're irreplaceable, as soon as you get up, we've got Mr. Tuktalian ready to take the seat.
So now he's pulling your hand out of a pail of water, you know?
Okay. Mr. Kasakian, does that conclude the items under 3A?
Under presentation and appointments, yes, Mr. Mayor. Next is city council and staff comments.
I would, we had a little bit of an unusual schedule this afternoon, and I would invite the chair of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency to entertain a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn the redevelopment agency.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned.
Okay, thank you. Next item is the city council and staff comments. Perhaps we can pause just a moment and let all the supporters of Ms. Beers make their way out.
She had a fair amount of family and friends here.
The chambers are essentially empty.
Essentially.
Mr. Mayor, what I might do as a follow-up to the appointment, next week we'll have a resolution and action by the council to actually establish the classification and compensation for the assistant city manager and to actually formally eliminate the deputy position. Included in that report will be a review by me of what I anticipate will be some savings by some organizational changes in the positions for Ms. Beers, as well as the deputy position being eliminated. It will be somewhere in excess of $200,000 annually. We'll have all of that for you next week.
Thank you. Okay, comments from council. Mr. Weaver?
Fine.
Mr. Draymond? Mr. Quintero?
I have Thursday, I believe, last week, was the beginning of Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, so very important on the Islamic religion's calendar. So I want to wish all of the residents of Glendale a blessed Ramadan.
You? I just have a few items. The first is anyone who is interested in becoming a member of the County of Los Angeles, a civil grand jury, the grand jury foreman is accepting nominations for that position. You must be a citizen of the U.S., at least 18 years of age, a resident of L.A. County for at least 1 year. You must be of ordinary intelligence and good character.
I don't
know who the judge will be of that. You must have a working knowledge of the English language, and your primary functions as a member of the grand jury will be to investigate county, city, and joint power agencies. You will essentially act as a watchdog by, no comments, I know what you're all thinking, as a watchdog by examining carefully and completely the operations of various government agencies within Los Angeles County. This is essentially a full-time job, and it will consume at least 30 to 40 hours of your time each week. There is some minimal stipend for each meeting. I believe it's $60 a meeting. So if anyone is interested, I'm going to have this information. Mr. Kasakian, would your office?
We all have.
If we receive the information, we can
Okay,
provide
I
it
can
to the
hand you
public.
this, and there's some applications that can be copied, and if you are interested, follow the instructions. I don't think you need a recommendation from anyone on the city council.
I think there's a sheet you can post too in their
Right.
announcement.
So we will do that. That's the LA Civil Grand Jury. The next item is I will be absent from next week's meeting, and the reason is I will be traveling to Korea with our sister city organization, visiting our sister city of Gyeongsang and perhaps one or two other cities. I will be gone for approximately a week. No city funds will be used in the trip itself for airfare or anything else. That's all going to be borne by the sister city organization. So I'll see you the week after next.
Who's going to be in charge?
Well, I'm not sure who the pro tem is. Is it Mr.
I was
Draymond?
asked.
Mr. Draymond will be the pro tem, so
Look out, people.
direct your comments to Mr. Draymond next week.
I'll take notes for you.
Yes, take notes, please. And my last item is to announce a blood drive in conjunction with the American Red Cross. The Embassy Suites Hotel is going to be hosting the blood drive on August 26th in the Black Pearl meeting room. I guess that's in reference to Pirates of the Caribbean, the Black Pearl meeting room. There will be refreshments, snacks, and even raffle prizes will be awarded to those who donate blood. If you have any questions, you may contact Kelly Halteman, Director of Sales and Marketing at the Embassy Suites Hotel, or our local American Red Cross office here on Brand Boulevard in Glendale. And obviously, we're always short of blood, and your donation is the gift of life. Thank you very much. Any comments from staff? Very well. Next item, please.
Mr. Mayor and Council, next on the calendar is the consent items, including minutes following a routine and may be acted upon by one motion. A member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed. There were cards submitted for item 5C.
Cards for 5C.
Mayor, move the remainder of the consent calendar.
Second.
Second. Roll call, please.
Council members Raymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver, Mayor Najarian.
Yes. 5C, please.
5C is Chief of Police regarding State of California Office of Traffic Safety Grant Program for Pedestrian Education, Speed, and Distracted Driving Enforcement. At C1 is motion accepting the grant in the amount of $254,795 and authorizing the city manager to execute the necessary agreements, certification, and other documents required to accept the grant. At C2 is a resolution appropriating $254,795 to provide funds for the program.
I have a card from Herbert Milano.
Mr. Mayor, if you may, because this deals with an issue that's of great importance to a lot of residents of the city, and it has to do with how we're addressing our traffic safety problem in the city, which we know we have. I'm hoping that there's a representative from the police department who could come up and maybe give us some more details about the grant and how the money will be used.
Maybe after.
Is there someone?
Lieutenant Povolitis is in the audience. Be happy to come forward.
Lieutenant.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Member of Council, Councilmember Friedman. This is something that we do on a fairly regular basis with you, and I would be very remiss if I can't start by, we owe a lot of thanks to Sergeant Dennis Smith because he's the primary author of these grants. But every year, OTS announces opportunities for grant funding, and it is a competitive process. And basically every year we compete as part of that process to obtain funds for the City of Glendale in order to provide a comprehensive traffic safety and traffic enforcement program. The grants that we primarily look at are ones that concentrate on enforcement, and then we look at everything else that we do, and we try to integrate a traffic enforcement and safety program. So where grant funding is available, we use that, and then we'll balance that out with other efforts. This particular one focuses on three areas. One is one which I know all of you on the council are familiar with, and that's speed. That tends to be one of our primary collision factors, or our top primary collision factors for accidents within the city. And we get numerous requests, whether it's from various canyons or West Glen Oaks or East Glen Oaks, or certain places even up in La Crescenta, whether that's working its way down Kenyatta or sometimes on Pennsylvania or Foothill for speed enforcement. And so a large chunk of this, for some 20 enforcement operations, allows us to dedicate people to speed enforcement and nothing but speed enforcement in order to reduce accident rates. For the first time in California, We all know we have a hands-free cell phone law, and I think most of us that have driven would say that that's probably one of the laws that is probably most ignored. And this always happens to me when I'm driving my own vehicle and not the company car, as I call it. But I'll be driving down a freeway, or in the last one, I was driving down a freeway, and it's middle of the afternoon, and all of a sudden there's a car weaving within the lane, and it's doing about 50 when traffic is doing 65 or 70. And, you know, all the detectors go off, and you start to think, is this somebody who's impaired driving? Essentially, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd instantaneously think, this is probably a drunk driver. People don't realize that when they get on the telephone, they are distracted from their primary job of maneuvering a 2,000 to 3,000 pound vehicle around the road, and then we have accidents as a result. So we actually have funding in this to do enforcement specifically dedicated to distracted driving, and so that will be another chunk. The last part of this grant will fund about a dozen pedestrian education enforcement. We have had very good success with this in the past. In fact, Sergeant Smith just finished off one of the last grants. I think our lineup room now has some 90,000 bilingual brochures for pedestrian safety that are in there. And we go out to the areas where we have traffic collisions involving pedestrians, and we educate pedestrians in those specific areas. And so this will allow us to continue that. And I think what's sort of exciting with this one is this will allow us now to do this for a 2-year cycle. We had one of these, OTS chose not to fund 1 year, but this year we had one the prior year. We will have one coming up, assuming you accept this, into the next fiscal year, which will allow us to have some consistency of that. And from having a little bit of experience in the Traffic Bureau, consistency in our enforcement and our education efforts is going to be very important to making a long-term reduction in our accident rates. And when it comes to pedestrians, obviously, the 2,000-pound car versus the 150, 160-pound pedestrian, the pedestrian always loses. So, you know, this is very important to our community, and this will allow us a lot of options. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you for such a detailed explanation.
Any questions from council? Okay, let's hear from the speakers. Herbert Milano, followed by Nancy Kent.
Good evening, Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council and City staff. A couple of years ago, Mayor Najarian, you made a special point in making concerning one of the most salient problems that we have in Glendale is traffic safety, specifically with regard to the pedestrian issue. And for many years, I've been asking that perhaps we could, as the public, obtain a periodic report on key performance indicators with regard to the Glendale Police Department. I think that traffic safety, pedestrian injuries should be one of those periodic reports that we get with regard to what are the policies that are being created with this money, what other additional funds are being allocated from Glendale's budget towards pedestrian safety, which programs are having an effect that is positive, which programs are not working, and then I'd like to see if the record shows that there actually has been fewer and fewer traffic injuries with regard to pedestrians. If my memory serves me correct, for several years, the number of pedestrian traffic injuries were around 220 per year, or maybe it was 120, I can't recall precisely the number. I was trying to look it up just now. And it remained fairly steady for that number year after year. Then we had a sudden reduction of about 20%. We never really did find out what occurred that gave us such a tremendous change from one year to the next. So I've been tracking those numbers, but we don't see a report of those numbers now. Now, I want to preface this with the idea that I'm not here to criticize the police department or anyone within the organization. It's just that having information with regard to the effectiveness of these programs is essential for us to see. Are we better off today than we were 3 years ago? If so, by how much? Which programs were successful? Which programs need to be revisited? Which intersections tend to be specifically troublesome? Which times of the day are particularly problematic? What other organizations should be involved in this process? That is the kind of report that I'd like to see that the monies that are coming into the City of Glendale for these programs are being effective. So those are my observations, and I hope that we move towards evidence-based programming here. Thank you very much.
That's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea, Mr. Starbird. Why don't we have the Traffic Bureau prepare a report, and we can discuss some of these issues, successes, new technologies. I know we've discuss the red light cameras as well, some of the pedestrian operations that we've done, the Safe and Healthy Streets organization that has worked hard to solve some of these issues.
Vice Grant.
I mean, this could be a very big, there's many things in here, everything from traffic calming issues. Here comes the chief, so get ready, chief, we're giving you a big task. Speed enforcement, radar, laser, funding opportunities, staffing issues on our motors, et cetera. Can we make sense out of all those requests and put it into a coherent report?
We'll certainly try, Mr. Mayor.
And I'm not sure how long that would take, but I think it's an issue that we always discuss in one form or another, whether it's dealing with the constituents on a one-on-one basis or listening to issues during oral communications or sometimes reading about tragedies in the newspaper. So I think getting a good status report, I think, would be helpful.
Be happy to.
I know we still have another speaker, but I just wanted to add that we did ask for a traffic safety formal agenda item to be brought forward, and if we could at the same time bring forward whatever analysis there might be of the different programs and their effectiveness, would be a great time to be able to see that data and review it.
Mr. Draymond.
Ms. Friedman mentions the agenda item that we talked about, and I don't want to, this is all great, I just don't want to lose track of what prompted that request for the agenda item. It has to do with specific constituent contacts that are continuous, recurrent, ongoing, with regard to problem areas specifically related to speeding. These are not specifically related to pedestrian safety issues, but ongoing speeding issues. We hear about the exact same places. Simply put, we can't place police officers on every corner at every place, but on the other hand, we can't put speed bumps all over the city. There must be another way, and I think that is something that, yes, it's combined in what you all are discussing, but I don't want to lose sight of the reason for asking for that agendized item, because in the meantime, as this all plays out over a period of discussion, and weeks go by, and months go by, and more months go by, and then before we blink, a year is gone, we're coming to some great conclusions, but it's not accomplishing a lot for those constituents that are continuing to call, continuing to email, continuing to stop us, saying, can you do something? I know Mr. Zern's been over his head with complaints and requests from this council, so about trying to engineer our way out of some of these difficulties. So I don't want that agendized item to become lost as we try to roll this other avenue out.
I agree. We shouldn't dilute the importance and the significance of the speeding issue per se. So let me give it back to Mr. Starbird then to work with the police department to decide the best way to present that.
Well, we'll come back more immediately on the specific topic and then have a broader discussion.
Okay.
I'm afraid what we've noted just this last week is it's going to get even more difficult. Some decisions that have recently come up relative to the use of even red light photo radar, and more limitations on even the application of that technology. So it isn't getting easier, it's getting harder.
Okay.
So we'll bring all that to you.
Okay. Next speaker is Nancy Kent.
Nancy Kent, resident of Glendale. I turned in a speaker card on this to ask if we would be seeing fewer drivers talking on cell phones because of this grant, and that was already addressed in the explanation of the grant. But if I may, I'd like to ask at this time, is the cell phone law enforced beyond what is provided for in this grant? Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that?
I'm not sure I It's currently enforced, and I think the absence of these funds would not mean that we would not be enforcing it. So, yes.
Hitting the knots.
Is that correct, Lieutenant? It is enforced regardless of the funding from this, as are all the other vehicle code laws. Thank you. I have no other speakers on this item. Is there a motion?
Move 5C 1 and 2.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item would be oral communications.
Thank you. I have two cards. Renee Lesk, I'm sorry. Renee Lesk. Apologize. Followed by Leon Mayer.
Hi, my name is Renee Lesk. I'm here representing the Glendale Democratic Club because we are having a social hour at Gordon Biersch on Thursday, August 19th, 2 days from now, between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m. We will meet to discuss Democratic politics or Glendale politics or Glendale as a city. You don't have to be a Democrat. You don't have to be political. Just come and meet us and have a good talk about whatever interests you. I think that's everything.
Which Gordon Biersch?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Gordon Biersch at the corner of Broadway and Brand.
BJ's.
BJ's.
Not Gordon Biersch?
No.
Gordon Biersch is in Burbank.
Burbank or Pasadena?
It's more briefings that's from GRA Economic Development is necessary.
Well, now I must confess I'm not a beer drinker.
Okay.
But it's definitely on the corner of Brand and Broadway,
So that's-
and I'm told on good authority that it's a BJ's.
That would be BJ's.
Very good. Okay.
Does anybody have any
I
questions?
was wondering why you were going to Burbank to talk about Glendale.
I'm not.
Okay.
All I know is I'm going to Broadway and Brand, and there will be beer there that I don't drink.
As long as you eat pizza, you're good.
Exactly. I will certainly spend money there.
And the date again, we sort
The
of...
date again is August 19th, Thursday. That's 2 days from today, and the hour is 6 p.m.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leon Mayer.
Evening, Mr. Mayor Najarian, members of the council, staff. My name is Leon Mayer. I'm here for the library and the Friends of the Library, and we're having a very interesting program on September 22nd. That's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. We're going to have a book called The Laugh Makers. Is it up on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Very good. The Laugh Makers is a book by Robert Mills, who is a 17-year gag writer for Bob Hope. And the book, The Laugh Makers, is a behind-the-scenes tribute to the incredible Bob Hope gag writers. And the book is called The Laugh Makers. So that'll be an interesting program, and we're going to honor Bob Hope himself in the sense that we will have Bob Hope library cards that have been issued just in the last month or two. Anybody who attend can turn into their regular library card, get a Bob Hope card, and if you're not a member of the library, you can still join the library by getting a Bob Hope library card. So that'll be the 22nd of September, 7 o'clock. And we had a last-minute program that just come up. We're taking advantage of it when we can. We have a lady from Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon. Her sister is a history professor at Glendale College, and her name is Mishka Mourani. She's a professor at International College in Lebanon. She's written a book called Balconies, a Mediterranean memoir. Now, the book is about how a lot of people in cities like Lebanon, Alexandria, and Athens, they live in apartments that have balconies, and they're close to where the action is. By the action, I mean the civil wars that have been going on there for years. And she's going to be here to talk about her book at the library tomorrow night. It's kind of a late notice, but tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the library. Mishka Marani balconies. A very interesting program. Anybody who has relatives in the Mideast who've been there, this should be very interesting to people with that background. So we invite you to come. Parking is validated. See you tomorrow night, and then we'll see you the 22nd of September. And I have copies of the Bob Hope event for everybody here. Thank you very much. And as I leave, if anybody wants some of these flyers, I have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no other cards for this portion of oral communications. Let's move to the next item.
Item 7 on the agenda is adoption of ordinances. At 7A is an urgency ordinance amending Section 1.20.010 and adding Section 1.20.030 to the Glendale Municipal Code pertaining to remedies for municipal code violations. This was offered on August 10, 2010 by Councilmember Quintero.
Mr. Quintero?
I will move 7A.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item.
7B is an ordinance extending the moratorium on the establishment of medical marijuana dispensaries for a period of 1 year. This was offered on August 10, 2010 by Councilmember Weaver.
Mr.
Mayor,
Weaver?
move 7B.
Or a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item.
At 8 under action items is 8A, City Treasurer, regarding City Treasurer's annual investment report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2010. At A1 is a motion accepting the report.
Mr. Baruki?
Yes, Mayor Najarian and fellow council members, pleased to be here this evening to review the investment portfolio for the city of Glendale for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2010. Before we begin looking at some of the numbers, let's kind of talk about what last year was all about, looking at the economy and interest rates. For most of the year, the market tried to find its footing, couldn't. Interest rates started the year at historically low levels, traded in tight ranges throughout the year, and ended the year even lower than when the year began. During the year, the Fed said interest rates would not be increased until the employment picture improves. And as the economy could not muster enough growth to improve employment, the Fed never did increase short-term interest rates. This malaise in the marketplace affected the city portfolio. Let's take a look at some of our numbers for last year. What we have is 3 columns looking at the end-of-the-year numbers for fiscal year ending 2008, 2009, and 2010. I'll be talking primarily about 2010 in comparison to the previous year. Regarding the portfolio, interest earnings, the rate of return, and the weighted average maturity of our portfolio. The city portfolio finished the fiscal year at $448 million, down $35 million from the $483 million at the end of the previous year. $23 million of this $35 million difference, as you recall, was for the Shoal Canyon purchase. Interest earnings for the fiscal year nudged a bit over $8.5 million. That was down $3.9 million from the $12.4 million last year. For the fiscal year, the annual rate of return for the portfolio finished at 1.89%, down 33%, or 91 basis points from the 2.8% of the previous year. This is a rather disappointing number, only in the fact that we struggled throughout the year to keep the portfolio rate of return at 2%. Only grudgingly did we concede that this was not going to happen by year end. We began the year with high hopes, as most economists and Fed watchers were saying that interest rates probably would increase halfway through the fiscal year at the beginning of 2010. It didn't happen in January. It didn't happen in February. They said early spring. It didn't happen in early spring. We held out for the fourth quarter, and not only didn't they increase, but they also fell. The weighted average maturity of the portfolio is right where we would like it to be in this type of rate environment, at a year and a half, 18 to 19 months. Looking at the 3 years, you can see a disturbing trend following the interest rate or the rate of return on the portfolio. The trend is down. Interest rates, even today, have not stopped falling. The 2-year this morning traded at 50. The 2-year Treasury traded at 50 to 51 basis points this morning. Let's flip to the next chart. Let's kind of take a look at the rate of return for the fiscal year. As we said, our city portfolio dropped 33% from 2.80 to 1.89. In that regard, let's take a quick look at the state pool, or the local agency investment fund. That shows us that it too could not escape the pool of falling interest rates during the year. LAIF saw its rate of return drop 150 basis points. That's 1.5% from 2.18% to average for the year 0.66%. That's just a smidge over 0.5%. That's for the year. I also show the 2-year treasuries. This is the average for the year. And the average for the year dropped, what would that be? 42 basis points from 1.32% to 0.90, just a shade under 1%. The city's return of 1.89, although modest, was 3 times what the LAIF return was and 2 times what the average 2-year treasuries would be. And if you look at our weighted average maturity, it would sit along the 2-year yield curve pretty close to where the 2-year rate would be. Let's kind of take a look at our next slide there. Asset allocation. This is where our money is placed. These are our investments. One looking at this chart would kind of say there's a sameness to it. The pie charts all look alike, and sameness is good with a fixed income portfolio. You don't want surprises in your investment portfolio. We have, looking at June 2010, looking at the purple half that we have there, those will be federal agency notes. 50% of the portfolio is in federal agency notes. And if you look at the dark blue corporate notes, another 6% there. So 56% of the portfolio this past year was in what we would call our longer-term investments, a year and out. Everything else, which would translate to 44%, led by that big, it's not even a piece of pie, it's really a slice of pizza size, the local agency investment fund of 33%, would be our short-term investments where we park money, we keep money that basically is there for under a year. Just quickly looking at 2009, you can see where the numbers match up. You've got federal agency notes 49% and corporate notes of 6%, so that's 55% compared to the 56%. That's pretty close to being the same. And then likewise on the short side of the spectrum. Let's kind of take a look at our next exhibit, which is our investment maturities. This is reflecting a chart showing how we manage our liquidity. Remember that big slice of pizza where we had 33% of our short money in the local agency investment fund? It's all sitting in that first bar chart, that 49%, which represents our investments in the portfolio that will be maturing within 1 year. And then you see, since we can invest only going out 5 years, that's basically the area of our investment world. It breaks it down and shows that within 2 years you've got another 6% maturing, another 3 years you've got another 17%, and likewise out the chart. The reason why we're keeping as much money in the local agency fund as possible is that to fill the gap between the 1 and 2 years. As I mentioned to you earlier, 2-year money as of this morning is trading at about 50 to 51 basis points. If we bought a treasury, we'd be collecting 50 basis points. The local agency investment fund, with access overnight to our funds, was returning 66 basis points. So we're using the local agency investment fund for liquidity purposes to carry us both for the first and the second year of our portfolio. I'll show you something interesting too. The entire spectrum of our portfolio, as demonstrated on this slide, if you go from 1 to 5 years, buying 5-year paper, 5-year treasuries, today the 5-year treasuries were trading at around 140. So you have to go out 5 years to get a return. You make a commitment for 5 years to get a return of 140 on the treasury market. That kind of indicates, too, the expectations for next year. If, in fact, we've got 5-year money going at 140, 145, or 150, you can't collect a whole lot of that stuff and build a portfolio return to something greater than where it ended for the month of June at 160. It's going to be a tough uphill climb. Ready, please? This exhibit simply reflects and accounts for the total investments and the cash that the Treasury Office holds. We've got the $448 million in the portfolio and cash on hand of $4.3 million for a total of $452 or $453 million. And we close our exhibits with the bond proceeds. And here we still have we're still managing about $2.3 million from the GWP bonds of 2008. I think that totaled $60 million in electric and $50 million in water. And there's just a smidge there left over from electric and $2 million for water. And of course, the bond proceeds from the GRA tax allocation bond that went out earlier this year, we're right now investing $20 million of that in a bond proceed account. Looking forward to the coming year, or the year that's already started as of July, let's first take a look at the economy. The economic outlook for the next year looks anemic. Some Fed members are expecting U.S. growth to be below 3% for a prolonged period of time, as economists contend that a 3% growth rate is needed in order for labor markets to significantly improve. There is not much momentum heading into this coming year. Mr. Bernanke himself says that the economic outlook remains unusually uncertain. Ditto for interest rates rising. A jobless recovery, as we have, is a slow slog indeed. As for the city portfolio, it will be another challenging year. Without interest rates moving higher, we have the real prospect of having another year as the one we just finished. And it could be a very long time before interest rates increase enough to have much of a positive impact to our earnings picture. On a positive note, and I like to close on a positive note because I'm kind of a positive guy in a dreary marketplace, we are
You're not
pleased.
so negative. You're pretty positive, Mr. Mr. Baruch.
We are pleased to say that the portfolio is safe, the portfolio is sound, and the portfolio is very liquid. And we are poised to take advantage of buying opportunities when they present themselves. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my remarks. I welcome any comments or questions from council.
Well, describe the portfolio as sound. Some might say it's sound asleep. But I think we understand the difficulties in the marketplace, and I don't think I could expect any sort of magic place to put our money where we would receive anything greater that would not carry with it an inordinate risk and danger of our principal. The business expert on the council, Mr. Quintero, author of the Quintero Report.
Not at all. Not at all. I am curious, the corporate notes.
Yes.
Well, let's start with that. Your corporate notes are only at 6%.
Yes.
You're not interested in increasing them? I mean, companies like
I am very interested in increasing that, although I can't increase it with the city investment policy the way it is, in the fact that we're restricted to purchasing AAA and AA paper. Only in the last 2 weeks have I seen that market open up. I am considering right now amending and coming back to council and asking for an adjustment as to what we can purchase. The government code does permit municipalities to purchase single A-rated paper. Single A-rated paper. Today, Bank of America issued 5-year notes at at 370. 5-year paper. Toyota Credit went out. Toyota is still AA. When we purchased Toyota, they were AAA. But we couldn't get any of this. But it was 3-year paper at 1 3/8. Not exactly setting the world afire. But there are quality names that are single A. I still like Bank of America as a name. I think it's a bank that's going to survive. They pay back their TARP funds. There are other names in that league, as well as names that are in manufacturing. Some of the chemicals and some of the drug companies.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you have to come back to the council, come back, because I think that's our only hope in terms of increasing some of the yield. Now, speaking of Bank of America, I noticed that it's pretty much exclusive Bank of America. You haven't tried Wells Fargo or J.P. Morgan for some of the commercial paper?
Well, commercial paper is different than corporate notes.
I know. But on the commercial paper, it's only Bank of America.
There's not a whole... Usually that stuff sells in blocks. It usually sells in blocks early in the morning. By the time we put our numbers together, and we're buying usually small amounts, 3 to 4 million, overnight or for a week, there's not a whole lot out there. What you're looking at there, we had quite a bit, only because in the month of June, we bought almost 20 million and parked it for a month at between 25 to 29 basis points to take care of our prepayment for PERS. That's the reason why you see the commercial paper up to 20 million. Usually we're just in and out with commercial paper. Overnight rates are about 11 basis points.
Thank you, Mr. Barucki. I don't think we have any more questions, but there are some comments from the public. We may have some follow-up for you. Herbert Milano, followed by Mike Mohill.
Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Milano. I have attended in the past a couple of the quarterly meetings, and I have, I think, a concern with regard to how we receive information with regard to what makes up this $448 million. Now, from what I know of the city's requirements, that we are supposed to maintain a certain reserve based upon the general fund for the year, which the numbers keep varying. I think it's around 33% or 35%. I know it's lower than it was a few years ago. So that means that we keep around $60 million in this investment portfolio due to the requirements of the charter to keep a certain amount of reserve based on the general fund. So that's $60 million. $26 million of these 450 is from the money we borrowed from the bonds that were issued, and then they're parked in this investment. So that's $26 million, which is, in a way, they're committed already to the projects, I believe, that you have for the Glendale Water and Power. You have $20 million of money borrowed on bonds that basically are put away. So I was wondering if anyone would have the answer to the remaining amount that totaled the 448. In other words, where is the money coming from, right? And to what are they committed that make up this $448 million that Mr. Baruki is handling and safekeeping for the city? I have a couple other quick questions on this as well. I was wondering if there are any rules with regard to how the city spends or makes use of these reserves, especially the reserves based on the general fund. Because my understanding is that all the other millions of dollars in this fund are already committed to something. So, assuming that the city has $60 million in the reserves due to the general fund, are there any rules that says this money should be used for an emergency that we have, capital improvements only, or should they be used for operational expenses, if ever? Because I know that for several years, the police augmentation fund was taken from the reserves. And later it became less and less out of the reserves, but we were using the reserves for operational expenses. And I think that many people would wonder whether or not that is really a good policy to have. The other side of this issue, not related to Mr. Baruki, is that we have roughly about the same amount of debt in terms of debt that the city owes. And I was wondering if maybe we could receive on a periodic basis as well, maybe in conjunction with Mr. Baruki, have the Finance Department report on the city's debt on a periodic basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mohill?
Good evening, Mayor Najarian, council members. I remember coming here a couple years ago when the treasurer says the recession was over. He also wanted about $20,000 for the Bloomberg Financial Services. And I said, why spend $20,000? I'll do it for free. And everybody laughed at me. Remember that? I do, because I was the butt of the joke. Okay?
It was more of a
today,
smirk.
who's laughing? I said then, I said, just look at the numbers. The recession is going down, down, and down. As long as the federal government continues to go its present route, we are going to continue having a recession. Will the sun rise in the morning, Mr. Quintero? I don't think so. Or the afternoon, whatever you want to call it. The philosophy at the federal level is hurting the city. Nothing that our treasurer can do can change anything. He can move a number here and a number there. It's magic. Financial services, we need about $20,000. And I said, what for? We could have saved that money. I would have taken that money. I was going to do the treasurer job for free, remember? Everybody laughed at me then, too. Well, here we are again, 2 years later, nothing's changed. Gloom and doom? Yes, it is. But the federal government sets this policy, and at the state level, we have a legislative body that's waiting till November when they hope the Democratic governor, hopefully on their end, Brown wins. Okay? It's all about politics. And that's what we have right now with this Treasury report. Gloom and doom, the recession is not over. It's to last for several more years. And unless we continue to keep our house in order, we're going to go right with the federal government, and we're going to have zero return on our investments. Thank you. Name is Mike Mohill.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird, any response to some of those questions from...
Well, before he speaks,
Okay, Mr.
yeah, I'd like to respond to Mr. Mohill. When the previous administration took over the government, as Mr. Mohill calls it, there was a budget surplus in this country. 8 years later, at the end of the Bush administration, we got into a hole. I agree with him that it's going to take a number of years to get out of, but let's just place the blame where it's due, and that is the previous administration. 8 years. 8 years.
May I reply?
No, I don't.
Come on, it's not a debate.
Well,
I'm sorry, Mr. Mohill.
Because we just remember, the Democrats control the purse strings,
Mr. Mohill.
not the Republicans.
Let's not debate federal issues, at least not this federal issue. We sometimes wander to that path. Ms. Friedman.
Actually, I'll let Mr. Starbird go first.
It's up to you. Mr. Mayor, I didn't keep track of everything that Mr. Milano mentioned, but I'll say what struck me is that on several of the things that he did mention, he starts with a faulty premise. Let me take an example. He mentioned that $60 million in general fund reserve is required by our charter. That's incorrect. The charter requires that we keep roughly half of the amount of revenues that we receive in property taxes in a required reserve. And the purpose of that back when it was done was because the city, like most cities, relied predominantly on property tax revenues. As a result, cities needed a capital, working capital fund. Otherwise, they had to go to the market and borrow. It used to be called, many cities still do, tax anticipation notes. So you would go out and borrow. Your revenues would flow in December, and then your revenues from property taxes would flow in again in the April post time frame. In the meantime, you're having to spend money. So our charter requires that we keep roughly half of our property tax revenues annually as a reserve for that purpose of working capital. We've gone way beyond needing half of our property taxes in working capital. So it's a very obsolete part of our charter, but it still remains. That amount is in the neighborhood of $19 million or so. The policy for the retention of reserves and general fund is set by the City Council. You have set a target goal of in the neighborhood of 35% for that. The Council makes determination how that reserve can be spent, and you do it by policy. And frankly, it's not hard and fast. You could change the policy if you desired. My recommendation to you has been, with respect to spending reserves, that you not spend reserves on ongoing operations. If you have something one time, an emergency, you can see if you could see the end of this cycle, maybe you'd want to spend reserves for some limited purpose. But I think it's most practical and more fiscally responsible not to spend reserves on ongoing operations, and you haven't. Let me move on to a couple of other matters. He mentions other money in the reserves is committed. I think he means various reserves in the city. You have different reserve policies for different funds, and funds are accounting entities within the city, of which we have over 60 different separate accounting entities. The general fund is one, the electric utility is one, the water utility is one. Those are all accounting entities in which you keep track of expenses, revenues, and have separate balance sheets for them. They each have their policies relative to their own reserves. The number that Mr. Baruchi quotes as our investment portfolio is the accumulation of all of the money from all of the city's various funds, regardless of its source, whether it's from our enterprise funds, our special revenue funds, or our general funds, and they are what's called commingled. They're all put together. Mr. Baruchi gets to invest them as a complete block and investment portfolio. He has to then manage the cash flow and the interest that he earns then is given back to the individual funds based on the amount of money that they have in that fund. Each of those policies is generally separate, and you establish those by policy of the City Council. Some are restricted by the fact that they are special revenues that have strings attached to them, such as, example, our housing funds or our Section 8 funds. It was suggested that we should report periodically on those, and you do receive that. In fact, we have spent study sessions in past budget years where you have wanted to know exactly what makes up that $480 million. Where is it spread among the various funds? We've done that. It's also in the comprehensive annual financial report that is on the city's website. That notes the cash balances, it notes the retained earnings in each of the funds, and it notes the various components of the balance sheets for each of those 60-plus funds the city has. That's what I was, there was a comment made about the police augmentation fund was taking from reserves. That's also inaccurate. The police augmentation fund was a way of segregating and accumulating money that could then be used for the additional staffing that the City Council approved for the police department. Money was set aside in the police augmentation fund from various sources for that purpose, and then over time the police augmentation fund was utilized to support the cost of those positions, 25 police officers and I think 11 support staff, while over time the general fund began to absorb those ongoing costs. And only in this last year did we actually fold that augmentation fund back into the general fund, because based on currently acceptable accounting principles, that fund needed to be part of the general fund. So we folded it back in along with the reserves that are still there to support the cost of those positions. Now, I didn't keep track of all the comments that he made, but that touches on a few of them.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman.
First, I want to thank Mr. Barucki for a very clear and exhaustive report. I just wanted to make a few quick comments. First of all, I want the people of Glendale to understand that the city does have a large amount of reserves, and that we've been pretty, I would say, strict about not reaching into those reserves, even during this time, this difficult financial time. And that's not the case with every city. There's a very large city just to the east of us that's been using a lot of its reserves for its day-to-day operations, and it's something that this city council has rejected. Secondly, just in a quick response to, I think, a little bit of Mr. Mohill's sort of suggestions, I think that in this economy, that to be treading water is a really good place to be. I'm glad that we don't have a fiscal policy of being overly aggressive and out investing in risky sorts of investments, and that we're able to keep our funds and to add, to them, even if it's slower than we'd like. I think that's a good conservative place for our city to be right now. And again, that's not always the case with every fund. In fact, one of the reasons that the state is in the problems that it's in with its pensions is not so much about the pension policies, but that the organization that was doing those investments, CalPERS, made a lot of really incredibly bad investments, and I believe that they lost in 1 week over $100 million. And that's really astounding. That's an astounding sort of irresponsible act of public funds. So I'm glad to see that our portfolio is not going backwards, that it continues to move forwards, and I thank Mr. Barucki for his hard work.
Thank you. Mr. Weaver?
Well, I'm staying narrow-focused. The report here tonight is note and file Mr. Barucki's investment report, period. Not getting into anything else. I chaired a investment committee for credit union for a number of years, familiar with what Mr. Barucki is doing. I think given the economy, he's done an exceptional job. I know when I participated in hiring Mr. Barucki, he had an extensive resume, background, that we're very fortunate to have him, and he didn't retire when he wanted to, thank God. I think he's done everything he can. And I won't go into more details because this is just his investment portfolio. If you wanted to modify it, that's something for another day. So if there's no other comments, I'll move 8A1.
Second.
Okay, and are there any other comments? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Council members Draymond?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes. Next item, please.
It'd be a city treasurer regarding city investment policy for fiscal year 2010-2011. At B1 is a resolution approving the investment policy for a city treasurer investment of city funds.
Need a report?
You?
You want
Don't have any cards on this. Is there a report?
Nothing has changed.
Mr. Mayor, I know nothing has changed the report. Mr. Barucki may want to make some comments. I would emphasize that the policy and the policy of the city has for some time been first and foremost security of the portfolio. That is the first and highest priority, and the charge given to Mr. Barucki is to secure our money, make sure it's safe. Second is liquidity, which is to make sure it's available to run the operations of the city as needed. So frankly, we don't have to borrow or have tax anticipation notes in order to meet our needs. And the last order of priority is one of yield, which is why his first concern is security, second concern is liquidity. Last concern, although we always are nudging him to try and get more out of our money, and he does a tremendous job at that, the last priority of your city policy is one of yield. So with that, unless Mr. Brookie has any further comments, the policy really hasn't changed from last year.
Mr. Weaver.
Many times in the years I've been here, we have tinkered with that investment policy. It's been pretty stable, I think, the last few years. We're very concerned about where the investments are going and the risk involved in doing it. So I tend to think that we got it down pretty good for this time. So unless there's any comments, I'll move 8B1.
Second.
If there are no other comments, a motion and a second. Let's take roll call, please.
Councilmember Strayman?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Montero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes. Next item.
Mr. Mayor and Council, at 8C is Director of Community Planning and Public Works regarding Directors of Community Planning and Public Works regarding potential code amendment, zone change, and general plan amendment related to the South Brand Boulevard specific plan area, as well as suspension of new preferential parking designation. At C1 is a motion to initiate code amendment, zone change, and general plan amendment. And at C2 is a resolution suspending the creation of new preferential parking designation in the South Brand Boulevard specific plan area.
Directors, which one first?
I'll start, Mr. Mayor, if I may. As the report suggests, we are recommending that you initiate a zone change for the South Brand specific plan area. To be completely straight about it, the South Brand specific plan as a planning tool and as an economic development tool has been obsolete for a while. And this we would like to take this opportunity at this time as a segue after Mr. Baruchi's report to revisit that area and come up with a different set of zoning policies that we will take some time to speak with the stakeholders and present to the Planning Commission and then to you. And along with that, since land use policy and parking policy are very much interrelated, we're asking that after having consulted with Public Works, we would like to present to you the option of suspending preferential parking in the South Brand specific plan area while we're revisiting the land use regulations. That concludes my presentation. If you'd like to get into the mechanics of this, Mr. Kraus is here to answer questions on the land use issues, and Mr. Zern, of course, regarding the preferential parking. Thank you.
And this is only to initiate
the zone
and a presentation and the process
to follow,
which will come in. We spoke earlier, and you said maybe a year or so in the
a year or so. Yes.
Ms. Friedman?
Just a quick procedural question. You mentioned the Planning Commission. Will this also go in front of, or any recommendations go in front of the Transportation and Parking Commission?
Absolutely, with regard to all of this. And actually, all the bodies involved would be. But officially, the Planning Commission makes land use policy recommendation to you. Before we go to the Planning Commission, we will discuss all and take comments from the Transportation Parking Commission as well.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
Yeah, when I got on council, one thing I wanted, and it took 10 years to develop a comprehensive strategic plan for downtown Glendale. 10 years to get it. Same thing should be done with the South Brand area. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's sorely needed to benefit everybody that works and operates in that sector, especially the auto dealers.
10 years, Mr. Weaver. Don't ask for anything else, because it'll be 10 years from now.
No, that's what
Let someone else ask for it.
You have no cards, I'll move 8.
We do have cards, and let's go through them. Nick Lamb, followed by Chris Welch, Margaret Hammond, and Herbert Milano. Mr. Lamb.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and member of the City Council. First of all, I hope it's not going to be taking 10 years. And I'm here in front of you today on behalf of the Brand Boulevard of Car, representing the car dealership in South Brand. We support the city's position to take a good look at the South Brand specific plan. As I recall, it was long time ago when we did that, maybe more than 20 years ago or more. and a lot of the condition there, they could be obsolete and outdated. As we build our Pacific BMW dealership, we run into a lot of inconsistency with the plan, and it cause unnecessary delay. And if we can have a more up-to-date, a plan that can fit more the need of the current situation, would be a lot better for the car dealership group. And the second item I want to voice is that we are in support of the recommendation that we put the preferential parking application in the meantime on moratorium. As the car dealer, we see this kind of like a situation that you put it on one area and then you push the problem to another area. You kind of move around in the neighborhood. It's not a long-term global solution. The car dealership of South Brand would like to spend time with the planning department and really try to figure out something that can work in the long time. And anytime you need our help, just let us know. And we are ready to sit down with you and try to figure out a way that would benefit both the city and the car dealership group. And with that, I don't really have more to say, and unless you have any more questions. And thank you for the opportunity for me to express our opinion.
I think we want the car dealers to be very much involved, Mr. Lamb. You are an important part and a stakeholder of the community. So it's incumbent on you and your associates in the dealership to play an active role in this. And
okay, we intend.
At the end of the process, we don't want to hear someone say we were left out or we weren't able to sit down at the table. So, and of course, that doesn't go only for the car dealers, but for every other stakeholder group that's in this process. And I know that working with Mr. Hagani on the San Fernando Road corridor zoning amendments, that was very critical and important to you in the process. So we want to have a good process here. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Chris Welch.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Chris Welch. I'm here actually as the chairman of the Transportation Parking Commission, and I wanted to speak very briefly on some of this stuff. I am in support of the actions here. I have been working with Mr. Hagani both personally on the subcommittee as well as in other ways to further this, because definitely in the South Brand area we need a more holistic sort of district-wide approach, particularly with regard to the preferential parking district. That said, especially in light of Mr. Weaver's comment about 10 years, the only thing that concerns me is that there's no time limit on this moratorium, and that if it does take an extensive period of time, the people who reside in these neighborhoods are definitely impacted by the shortage of on-street parking. So I would respectfully suggest that you might consider putting a time limit on that moratorium. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Margaret Hammond, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the council, staff, and audience. I'm involved in this, and my name is Margaret Hammond. In a big way, I have property in that area, and I'm over there quite a bit, and I watch the problems. I'm speaking for the people that are residents. And don't ever forget, that is the largest congested area in Glendale. And why? All the apartments were built there, the late 70s, the 80s, on and on. And they have a terrible time. A lot of those apartments are old apartments and have only one parking space per person when there's never, most people, there's 2 cars, whether it's a 1-bedroom or not, or a 2-bedroom if it's more. And I've watched the carry-on when I've been there working with the dealers, their staff coming over and parking and then going back over. I'm not going to name it. It's on Maple and Brand is the one in particular. And watching the nonsense with them taking the parking on the street. And the understanding, as I recall, when this thing went in for the special area for the car dealers, was that they were to provide parking for their staff. And I believe it came up at the meeting, I heard that particular meeting, that there is parking, but the help refuses to park in it. Or some of the help said they were not permitted to because the owners wanted to use that for storage for the cars. Well, hello, what about the quality of life for the people? Sure, you guys don't care. You've got your parking, your driveways and all, but you should see what those poor people have to go through to try to find a parking spot when they come home from work. And it's all day long. I watch it, and I'm telling you, it's really, I feel bad. And as I said, only that I do have enough that I can park on my property, it would be really a problem, big time. So I'm saying, think about the people that live there. It isn't all just about business, you know. I mean, what good's business when the quality of life for the people that live there, sure, they're just working people, like I said. They go out, they're dishwashers or they're gardeners or whatever. But they're important, too, to our city. They help maintain the city's, whatever you want to call it. But they need to be considered also on this deal about parking. That if it's going to be preferential just for a few people, then it would be a big problem. Thank you very much.
You, Herbert Milano.
Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Molano. I was a member of the Downtown Specific Planning Committee, and for about an 8-month period of time, I tried to bring the issue of the insufficient amount of parkland in this area of downtown. Time and time again, meeting after meeting, I tried to bring this up, but I really did not have much of a voice. The voice of the developers came first, and basically my concerns were basically put aside. It was because of that situation and the reports that came years ago with regard to the recognition of the shortage of parkland in the southern part of Glendale that I decided to follow through with that lawsuit to which you referred to last week. So there was a reason behind it, but I want to basically state the following. The southern portion of Glendale developed in a very ad hoc way, and Mr. Quintero is very right. There was a tremendous amount of overdevelopment without the proper and adequate planning. Now you have a certain number of residents there that are being impacted severely. And every year they get impacted more and more as more development takes place and there's fewer places to park. So their quality of life, as Margaret mentioned, is significant. Also, the Transportation and Parking Commission, where several residents, many of them, were truly fed up. The problem is this, that when the BMW dealership was built and improved, it does bring money to the city, but there were not sufficient number of parking spaces built because it's costly. In other words, they did not build sufficient number of parking spaces for their own employees. What they want with this moratorium basically is to bypass the Transportation and Parking Commission and the recommendations, bypass all the concerns of the residents, and basically do a moratorium so that they can park on the street. So what happens to the residents? You have to make up your mind. If you don't want people to live near those areas, then change the plans and buy them out. But for the time being, if you're not willing to buy those properties, those residential properties, people need a place to park. Our transportation system does not allow us the flexibility to be able to take, fast and efficient transportation modes to any part of LA County for these people where they have to get jobs. So they have to use a car. So this is an issue that I think is in my opinion, just a simple way of bypassing this whole issue of the preferential parking. These people need a place to park, and their quality of life deserves that you pay attention to their needs. It's another reason why I think, Councilmatic District is important. They need representation of someone who will take care of their needs. The other part of their needs is parkland, and it is my hope that you look back at your records, look at the deficiency of the recreational planning areas, and start addressing the issues that were looked at by city councils in the past, including Mr. Quintero, to address the issues of parkland for these people. If you don't want residents there, then make up your mind to just change the whole city to be commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards. Let's go to council. Mr. Draymond.
I have a couple of questions. Mr. Hagani, so I understand why we are going to look at this potential code amendment and zone change and general plan amendment related to South Brand Boulevard, the specific area. Why have we added to that the suspension of new preferential parking designations?
If you notice, the South Brand specific plan area actually expands beyond just the strip of South Brand that includes the car dealerships, and goes all the way to Glendale Avenue on one side and goes to Central Avenue on the other side. And I can tell you from my experience, the way that the zoning within the South Brand specific plan area, zoning designations that have been created is, for lack of a better word, is gerrymandered zoning, and in fact does not take into account the underlying principles, policy principles that the South Brand specific plan has said. So I do think that we need to revisit the entire zoning coordination within the area between and the relationships between the commercial zoning and the residential zoning, and then come up with a brand new policy and maybe propose new borders for the different types of where the one zone begins and one ends. In that relation, we think the parking configuration and the public right-of-way play an important role, and then the parking policy that we come up with the South Brand specific plan is an important role. Therefore, we think given that a preferential parking can come in without any attention to all the different policies that we're looking at the same time, we do not want to be in a situation to come back and then propose that the council or the TPC go back and revisit some of the parking policies that they have come up with. So therefore, we ask to stop that so that we have the chance to look at everything at the same time.
Well, let me pursue that line of questioning a little further, if I may, Mr. Mayor. We have an issue?
I do. Due to an interest in real estate in the proposed South Brand Boulevard specific plan zone, I am obligated to recuse myself from these proceedings and will turn over the chairmanship of the meeting to Mr. Draymond.
Okay.
I apologize for
not
realizing that.
Don't go far.
Talk to yourself. That's yourself.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Najarian. Then I'll ask myself if I may proceed with the slide.
You got it.
Mr. Hagani, so, but the point is, you don't, I assume you don't, gerrymandered zoning or not, or parking or not, I assume you do agree that the residential area there is impacted by the parking situation.
Oh, absolutely.
So why would we suspend that for a year while we're taking, at least a year, while we're looking at all of this?
Because, to be completely frank, I do not necessarily think that some of the areas that are currently zoned residential with overlays for parking, that's the best part, the zoning policy for those, and we would like to maybe look at options of rezoning some of those areas or making some new overlay zoning district as an economic development tool for the commercial district. Therefore, if the interests of the currently zoned residential areas take precedent over the overall zoning policy, then we may put ourselves in a situation where the interests of what may be changing in the future will have taken precedence, if that makes any sense.
Well, no, it doesn't make sense to me because, and here's my question. Not creating a moratorium doesn't mean we can't look at it. It doesn't mean we can't take action. Doesn't mean we can't study it. Doesn't mean we can't do exactly what's being suggested, other than the fact that we are going to place on those residents a significant amount of burden that perhaps right now they're not facing. To say that we don't suspend the preferential parking doesn't mean we can't look at it. Doesn't mean we can't make decisions about it, and doesn't mean we can't change the policy. I'm just concerned that we're talking about a process that's going to take perhaps a year.
I'm going to just say that the recommendation is only for new designations, not the existing designations, and Mr. Zarin could address that some more.
Could you help me by being, and perhaps the public too, and some of the speakers, by addressing what those are, the new preferential parking, because that's actually what it states, new preferential.
And Mr. Draymond, that would be anything from this point during the course of the study that planning is going to do, where if we were to get a petition to come in or we would get a request, that we would put a hold on that until the overall plan was done. Anything currently in existence would remain as it is.
There we go. Very good. Ms. Frieden.
I just wanted to respond to Ms. Hammond and Mr. Milano, and I appreciate your concern and your comments, and I really mean that. But as far as I'm concerned, the burden that's on the residents who live in that area is the primary reason that we're doing this. It's because the system that's there now is not working according to our commission, according to our planning director, and to the people who live there. It's not working the way that it was designed to work. It's certainly not working as well for them as it needs to, and that's why we're doing this. So it's really to deal with those issues. And by the way, those parking issues are not by any means unique to Glendale. Any an old multifamily neighborhood all over California, certainly some of the larger cities, if you look at Berkeley, San Francisco, you have situations where it's really hard for people to have cars sometimes, much less park them. So we're dealing with similar issues that happened with any neighborhood where homes were built before it was expected that everybody had 2 cars. So to say that we don't care because maybe we live in a different neighborhood, I think is really unfair and not true. And I've certainly had the experience of living in neighborhoods where I couldn't possibly have had a car. So I know what that's like as well. But I appreciate your comments, and believe me, as far as this council member is concerned, the whole reason to do this is to address the concerns of the residents in those areas.
Mr. Quintero.
I just want to say that a few years ago, we came up with a wonderful plan. Dave Ahern had many, many meetings, and what we were going to do was to try and cul-de-sac some of the streets there next to the dealerships. It would have been excellent for the employees. Would have been not good for the employees. It would have been excellent for the residents. They would have had cul-de-sacs, and at the end of the cul-de-sac, maybe not exactly a mini park, but perhaps some benches, etc. But Ms. Hammond led the charge and got all the neighbors riled up, and they voted against their best interest. There would have been no overflow from the dealerships. There would have been clearly marked residential properties and parking, etc., and then the commercial district. I thought it was a slam dunk. I did everything I could to try to have the residents, property owners, and renters to go ahead with it, but we weren't successful, and it's really too bad because that would have been the ideal situation for them. When you look at the Nissan dealership and all the rest of the dealers, it just naturally flows over to the residential neighborhood. Sometimes the mechanics themselves that may go out for a test drive. All of that would have come to a screeching halt. And here we are years later still dealing with some of the issues. Just wanted to point that out. It just shows you how people sometimes, don't quite understand what's going on and just knee-jerk reaction, and basically that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Weaver.
Well, I don't know exactly when, but I do know this is the oldest part of Glendale down there, dating back to 1906. I presume, and I don't know the exact time, but I'm sure car dealers were there in the 1920s, 30s, when they invented automobiles, at least in the 30s. And at that time, all single-family residences down there. And unfortunately, mistakes were made where single-family homes torn down, apartments built, insufficient parking requirements in the apartments. Thus, we have the problem we have. Cul-de-sacing will simply shift traffic from one street to another. Glendale Avenue to the east is one of the heaviest traveled streets in Glendale. You want to take it off ramp, cul-de-sac it, you're pushing it over to Glendale Avenue, or you're pushing it over on Central on the other side. There's just no easy way to solve it other than, I think, about downzoning, and maybe 40, 50 years from now, a lot of that multifamily housing, if we downzone it, would be down to triplexes, duplexes, or single family again. Nothing that says you can't reverse it, but it's going to take time. And in master planning it, you can designate and say where future parks may be through zoning. Of course, we'll be flooded in here with people that will say, I own the property here, and you've now diminished the return I can make on my property by changing the zoning from residential or commercial to park, an open space. Yes, they'll flood in here. But the reality is, if we want to master plan and change the character down there, given what we know today, with a vibrant auto dealer row that we have to maintain for sales, there's no doubt, there's no way to get around that, then we have to consider that and consider the residents that are there and what is best for the future residents, not in our time, but 40, 50 years down. The city has changed, and we can only make a guess of what it's going to be in 40, 50 years, and we can master plan it for that way. So, only thing I just say, I don't see putting a time limit on. I think staff understands the urgency that this won't take 10 years, and it shouldn't take 5 years. It should be back here in a year or two with a lot of public input, and we'll find out exactly what the public wants down there. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Ms. Friedman.
Yeah, first I want to thank Mr. Weaver, because I didn't realize that there were car dealerships down there at that point. That's pretty interesting.
I don't know.
I don't know how old the Avenue of Cars actually is, or
It goes way back. It has to be at least the 30s, I'm guessing. 20s? See, there you go.
Well, that's very interesting. Not to get too far off the subject,
Studebaker.
I did want to just throw out that there is an alternative to downzoning that certainly worked in urban areas and in dense areas, and that's good and reliable and plentiful public transportation. And that's something that I think that area desperately needs. And until Los Angeles as a city, I'm climbing on my soapbox just for a minute, I'll get down in a second, but until Los Angeles as a city really get serious about moving people around in a way that doesn't require everyone to get into a single-person automobile, we're always going to be facing these kinds of problems. So that's certainly something that anything that we can do to make our public transportation better and make our roads safer for pedestrians and bikes, which is another form of transportation, I will certainly be doing everything I can to try to make that happen as long as I'm up on this dais. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Mr. Quintero, anything else? I will in 1 second.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that I don't think there's any question what the intention of this item is. It is to improve the area. There's no question. I think the key is simply that we're talking about a moratorium, and perhaps part of it is the use of the word suspending preferential parking, a moratorium on creating new preferential parking in that area. So, with the idea that what is in existence will remain until such time as we have the public outreach that we all know, Mr. Hagani, you are a master at, and so. All right. Yes, Mr. Weaver.
I'll move 8C 1 and 2.
Second.
We have a second. Mr. Kisaki.
Council members, Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian, who just stepped out, and Mayor Pro Tem Draymond.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
He's watching.
Would you like to know what we've been doing?
What have you guys been doing?
We've been waiting for you.
Increasing the value of your real estate holdings.
No.
I'm
Don't say
the city
that.
attorney. I'm just joking here.
Mr. Weaver is not serious when he says that,
I don't
and my
know
vote
what's gonna
should be
happen.
noted as an abstention.
Abstention.
His vote should be not recorded. He was not present.
Actually not recorded. Correct.
Mr. Mayor, we just took roll on item
Thank
8.
you. Let's move to 8D.
8D is City Manager regarding designation of a voting delegate and alternate for the League of California Cities Annual Conference to be held on September 15 through 17, 2010. D1 is a motion authorizing the mayor to select the voting delegate and 2 alternates for the annual conference.
Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. During the annual League of California Cities Conference One of the sessions is their business session where they plan the legislative agenda for the upcoming year and any other business matters that the League of California Cities may have come before it. The various members of the League, which is practically every city in the state of California, has representatives and are allowed to vote during those sessions. This is an opportunity to name the city's voting delegate, and you can have up to 2 alternates in case for some reason the voting delegate can't make the session. All members can attend, but you have to have the authorized voting delegates in order to cast Glendale's vote at that session.
Thank you. Mr. Quintero.
I nominate Ms. Friedman for the role.
Is there a second?
Second.
And do we need an alternate as well in the same motion?
We'll nominate Mr. Quintero,
Second.
Since you're both attending?
since we're both attending.
Okay, roll call, please.
If I can, you may have one more if somebody else is attending, just as a backup in case something goes wrong.
I may attend, but let's not complicate the...
They'll make it. They'll
Okay.
make it.
Okay, I have no cards on this item. Let's take roll call, please.
This is for the voting delegate being Councilmember Friedman and the first alternate being Councilmember Quintero. Councilmembers Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Congratulations. 8E.
At 8E is Director of Human Resources regarding new memorandum of understanding MOU between the City of Glendale and the Glendale Management Association Glendale Managers. At E1 is a resolution adopting the new MOU commencing July 1, 2010 and terminating after June 30th.
Mr. Doyle.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This item before you is a resolution adopting a one-year memorandum of understanding between the City of Glendale and the Glendale Management Association. This MOU is a culmination of several months of negotiations between the city and the GMA. We're very pleased to have come to this conclusion, which, as you see from your staff report, will result in some cost savings due to some concessions offered by our managers. I can go through some of the highlights if you like, but the main elements of this MOU, first of all, are a 0% cost of living increase. There's no increase in salary or adjustments. We have an increase in the amount the employees are paying towards their cost sharing, towards the CalPERS. So, in effect, paying for more of what the retirement system is offering them. That increase is going from what's currently a 0.5% contribution to a 2% contribution. There's also a agreement to employ a second-tiered retirement, going from the 2.5% at 55 retirement plan as of January 1st of 2011 to a 2% at 55 plan for all new hires after that date. Additionally, there is a greater contribution on the employee's part for the medical insurance. Currently, they pay just 10% of the annual increased costs when medical rates renew. That's been bumped up to 50%. And finally, a adjustment to the salary ranges, where what we've done was added 3 salary steps at the lower end of the salary range, which will enable us to hire new employees in at a lower rate and essentially broaden our salary range structure. Not doing anything to the top end, but just adding lower steps at the bottom end. With that, those are I think the highlights of this negotiation process. And if you have questions, we can
Mr. Starber.
try and answer them.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, just a couple of editorial comments. First, to the Board of Directors, the GMA, and to the membership, because this passed with very strong support by the city's managers, and by that I don't mean myself and the executives, but all the managers that work below the department head level in the city. Because this hasn't been easy for anybody, and it's reflective of the leadership in that group and in the organization. You saw it with the firefighters, now you see it with the GMA. I think the net result here is about equivalent to about a 3% compensation reduction, because they're picking up what would otherwise be our costs, the city's costs. In this regard, saving the neighborhood of $750,000 in the current fiscal year. So thanks to the board for their leadership. Dave Cole and other members of the board are here this evening, but I want to thank them for that leadership. Also notable, we heard a lot of news from the state governor's office several weeks ago about agreements that he reached with several of the unions for the state, which frankly in many respects mirrors what we've accomplished here. But there is some divergence, and that is that in order to reach agreement with the state unions, the governor had to add an additional step to the ranges, which means in the course of the year, many, if not most, of the state employees will essentially be given a pay increase. And the State Legislative Office, Analyst's Office, recently published a report that said virtually all of the cost savings from those packages have been wiped out for many years because of what they had to concede in order to get agreement due to that one-step increase that will result in about a 5% increase for most of the employees of the state. That isn't in this agreement. In fact, just the opposite is here, and that is adding steps to the entry-level component of the range so that people who may be hired in the future, assuming we're competitive, can come in at a lower level. And so this results in a true net savings beginning this year to the organization, to the city, of the neighborhood of $750,000. So on the one hand, you had, I think, the right thing being done long-term in the state, but in order to get it, having to incur costs that virtually wipe out the benefit they received. The second component, which is very long-term, is a two-tier retirement system. And you've heard a lot of play about these in the press recently. And of course, the state was notable because they had the unions agreeing to also step back to plans that were in effect prior to the enhanced plans that came in beginning in 2001. In this case, two things that are notable. One is going back to the plans that were in effect prior to the enhanced plans beginning in 2001. Two, going to a 3 highest year average. There's been a lot made about that in the press. The fact that the current plans in most cities is single highest year, which allowed the kind of situation in Bell to take place, where there's a spiking of the salaries, and in 1 year then can result in very significant increases in pay. In this case, the agreement here is to not only roll back the retirement plan, but also to implement the 3 average highest years, which will tend to dilute the effect of what had been happening with the single highest year. So once again, I think it's notable that the managers have stepped up, provided leadership to both short-term and long-term begin to change the retirement system that's been problematic, as well as result in immediate cost savings to the city and in the general fund in particular. So our recommendation is that you confirm the memorandum of understanding with GMA.
Thank you. I do have several cards. Let's go to the public. Herbert Milano, followed by Al Hoffman.
I have a visual to present. I don't know if the city clerk has it available. Mayor Najarian and members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Milano. What I'd like to present is just some very quick history with regard to the overall Glendale government salary and wage trends in the during a 9-year period. The inflation rate has been less than 25%. The population increase only 3.5%. So if you combine those two, you actually got a combined population inflation of 25.5%. Now, if you look at payroll increases, it's been 50% increase. Pension increases of 284%, and medical insurance expenditures went up by 500. May I have the next slide, please? So, inflation 25%, the city manager's pay went up by 35%. The third line should read assistant city manager, went up by 39%. Assistant city attorney should be the city attorney, went up by 41%, fire 51%, and the director of Glendale Water and Power by 54%. In other words, the gains in all of these positions have been far outpacing the rate of inflation, significantly. But what is really hitting the city incredibly hard is the pension system. The pension system that we had before 2005 for managers was 2% at 55. That's 60% of their last highest pay if they worked for 30 years. It was changed to 2.5% at the age of 55, which makes it 75% of the last pay for the length of their retirement. If they live 30 years, that's a substantial amount. To give you an example, assistant city manager McFall benefited from that change, if he lives 30 years, to the tune of $1.3 million. That little change from 2 to 2.5 to him, given his salary, was a gift of over $1 million. And it means that for every employee that earns over $100,000, you pretty much have another extra $1 million in there. So you have about 600 employees. You have well over $500 million in pension obligations that you created in 2005. Of course, Ms. Freeman, you were not available then. Look, there are significant issues here with regard to what is being presented. Giving up a measly cost of living increase, which is already compensated for with regard to the other benefits that they get with regard to the medical benefits, for example, educational benefits and so forth, which comprise part of the consumer price index. They're already compensated for it. So you're giving up very little, and they gain a significant amount during that period of time. The fact that they recognize that new employees should be going back to 2% at 55 means that that's really what we should be doing. I think that we should be going back to a defined contribution plan instead. That will relieve all of the future problems with regard to the pensions.
Al Hoffman, followed by Mike Mohill.
Mayor Najarian, City Council members, Al Hoffman, resident of Glendale. Having heard Mr. Doyle's report, I'm not too sure. It sounds like accepting this MOU will actually save us money, but I'm not actually sure that's really the case. I think we're fuzzing things over. I think the extent of the long term, all the present employees that are going to get these big pensions and pay, that's going to keep going. It's going to cost us money, but I don't know exactly how this all plays in. Now, Mr. Milano has come up with figures, and I don't know if these are figures are right or wrong. He researches this data, and a lot of you claim it's wrong. I'm not sure if it is right or wrong. But my concern is that, when the bell rang down there, all of a sudden people are realizing all over the state, the country, cities at the level are getting themselves into pension problems. Can we afford the pensions right now? Does our city base revenue cover all the pensions that we're obligated for? When I saw what the pension liability we have for Randy Adams, if that's really true, for one employee, it amounts to thousands and thousands of dollars. And are we going to be able to cover that every year? That's what my concern is. And I think, I came out of the private sector. My pension doesn't stay the same. I lost half of my IRA that I contributed to for 30-some years. My 401k got zinged. My wife's retirement from JPL lost $200 a month because she's in a medium risk investment with the market. If you're low risk, you don't even keep up with inflation. So there we are. We get hit. Mr. Baruchi reported how everything has been poor for our investment. Yes, the investments are poor, but all of these civil servants keep getting their pensions for the rest of their life. What a neat deal. I wish I had that. I don't. Most of us don't. And this is what the crux of the problem is, and that you as the city council members are the keepers of the funds, and you have to start looking at this in the future. I appreciate that they're going to affect the incoming employees, but we've got to deal with all the high-paid salaries we got now and the resultant pensions, and that is my concern. Thank you.
Mike Mohill, followed by Margaret Hammond.
Good evening, Mayor again and council members. My name is Mike Mohill, long-term resident of Glendale. Well, tonight, City Council, City Manager, and the Manager will all be patting each other on the back when they go home tonight. What a great job they have done in holding wages and pension cost. I ask, what wages and what pension? Big deal. No cost of living adjustment. But new hires can still retire at age 55 instead of, instead of the city contributing 2.5% at 55, the union agreed to 2% at 55. Big deal. Millions of taxpayers are living on Social Security while union workers still have a generous pension. Why? As the years go by, these workers will be the only working class, mind you, able to afford a vacation in the Cayman Islands, but not the taxpayers who made it all possible. We need to give our city workers bigger wages and bigger pensions. We need to go broke sooner rather than later. We can declare bankruptcy, and we can tell the union to go pound sand. Voters need to take back our government, as the pressing crop of politicians are beholden to the unions who put them in office. We need to fire every council member who votes for this contract tonight and the previous ones this fiscal year. Voters, please, the most important issue facing the city are the wages and the pension that are going to make us bankrupt. Rockhaven development is not important. Verdugo Hills Golf Course is not important. Pacific Park Swimming Pool is not important. Affordable housing is not important. Redevelopment is not important. More parks are not important. None of this is important if the city is bankrupt. Remember, voters, there is nothing in the city charter stating the city must belong to CalPERS. The city should terminate CalPERS ASAP. Replace CalPERS with Social Security, where both employer and employees contribute equally. Remember, voters, vote for council members in April 2011 who do not take money from our city unions, take their endorsements, and are not under the spell. My mother says always, Mike, follow that money. This is where the power is. The city council has to go. Remember, April 2011 is our next election, and let us vote these officers out. They are doing it in the city of Bell, and we can do it in Glendale. My fellow Glendalians, tonight we can take back the city, the politicians, and the union. Are you with me? We must revolt.
Margaret Hammond.
For city council.
Good evening again, Your Honor, members of council, staff, and audience. My name is Margaret Hammond. A lot of the stuff that Mike Mohel says, I do have to agree with. I worked for 30 years for a private company, which was my choice. And when I retired at 62, there was no pension. There was no health benefits, nothing. I was wiped, that was it. It was up to me. It was due to a health problem that I had to retire from my husband, and so I had no choice. I had to pick up the difference from 62 to 65 and pay for Blue Cross or whatever. And from then on, I went, of course, once I was 65, I went on Social Security, Medicare, and I have SCAN, which is a very good plan, a HMO. And I'm lucky that I have good health and I don't need specialists particularly. But what I'm saying is that when I worked for this company, I did have health coverage, but I had to pay into it. And my husband was not yet on Medicare, Medi-Cal, whatever it is, and so he had to have pay for private Blue Cross. So what I'm saying is, somehow the city workers feel they're entitled because they work for the city that they should be given all these benefits. A private company could not, my company that I work for, could not have survived paying the kind of money that's paid out by the city for health and pensions. It would have gone down the tubes. And I was secretary treasurer of the company. It wasn't like I was just a clerk. So what I'm saying now, over the last 2 years, the Burbank Water and Power has generated an average of 30% more revenue than Glendale Water and Power. But Glendale Water and Power has 2.5 times as much long-term debt as Burbank Water and Power. Glendale Water and Power's debt as a percent of revenues is 68%, while Burbank's is only 20%. Glendale took 73% of GWP's cash flow for the general fund in 2009, while Burbank took only 44% of its water and power cash flow for the general fund. Glendale's general fund transfers equate to about 9% of gross revenues, while Burbank's is about 3%. And these were pulled from the GWP annual reports and the Burbank annual reports, and were given to me by a reliable source. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Mr. Weaver?
Make a few comments. One, I'm very proud of what management team has now done in this city. This has been, I've gone through labor negotiations for 14 years, and this was very difficult. It's been difficult. Fire, management, city employees, police. It's not easy to take back what we've granted in the past. And I'm very proud of this management team realizing what we're going through as a community. Like it or not, I tell people in the city, stop, think of the bottom line. You have a job. City goes bankrupt, you might not have a job. Be grateful. You may not take home as much as you did, sign of the times, but you do have a job. You are getting a paycheck to put food on the table for your family. It's hard sometimes to say it, and I've said it a few times, and I have not got very positive feedback for saying it. That's reality of it, so I'm very proud of tough negotiations we've done with management, and we've reached a compromise that helps us. Other thing I'd say is when I graduated from college in 1963, I could have a choice of jobs, public sector, private sector. And I was told, well, you can get more money in the private sector. But if you go in the public sector, you have job security. When you put in the years, you'll get a retirement stuff, guaranteed. You don't get that in the private. It's a trade-off. You want to make more money in the private sector, go to it. But what always happens, and in my lifetime I've seen it more than once, when the economy is bad, the public sector is the one that is chewed on. You got too much. We don't have enough. Well, when you got 18 or out of college, you had a choice to make. You want a private sector? Fine. You could have gone public, but I think it's grossly unfair to attack the public sector employee because they chose to go into public service. Yeah, there's benefits to it. Job security, I had it for 37 years. I'm damn proud of it. It guaranteed me a retirement check every month. You know, the thing that does frustrate me here is when these know-it-alls, these gadflies, get up and talk like they have all the facts. Mr. Starbird, the staff, and the five of us here are dumb. We just don't get it. Here are the facts. They put them up. Mr. Milano is good at a moving target. You never know what he's going to say this week or that week. Oh, and there's heads shaking out there. Oh, no, they know it all. No. How can we be prepared to respond to every little thing? Most of the time, Mr. Milano is wrong in rolling up his different statistics, his percentages, whatever, and hopes the people will buy it at home. Well, now, election's getting near, you're going to vote us out of office. Mr. Draymond and Mr. Weaver. Fine, that's right, you're shaking your head, yes. Okay, Mr. Hoffman, you do it. You all go out there, you run for office, you get the people on your side. And I'll bet you're going to lose. Most people in this city, 99% of the people in this city, aren't complaining. The same people come down here all the time and complain. You're an embarrassment. When you attack us, we're saving $750,000. It's in black and white. The work is done. And you sit here and say, no, we're lying to the public. It's going to be much worse. God, you actually expect us to sit here and believe that. And you expect that 99% of the people sitting at home to believe it. Well, they're not. There's no articles in the paper supporting you. So your only alternative is take out the papers, get 100 signatures, run for council, and get 10,000 people to vote for you. Then you can sit up here and you can try to convince 2 others to agree with your position and change the way this city has been for 104 years. Just very frustrating to hear this all the time. And then comparing us to Bell. The second Bell hit, I knew it. It wouldn't take long before the gadflies are comparing us to Bell. We're just like Bell. Gosh, really? Get a life. You think anybody's buying into this garbage? We're not. But we have to sit here every week and listen to the garbage. Yeah, Mr. Hoffman, keep shaking your head. Yeah, we have to listen to you every week. First Amendment rights. But if you don't like what we're doing, go out and do something about it. Don't tell us, go out and do something about it. Again, management, thank you so much. My hats off to you and to the fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weaver. Ms. Friedman?
Well, that's a tough act to follow. Look, are there problems with the pension system in California? Absolutely. Did the city do things years ago that they're sorry that they did? I wasn't here, but I am sure that they did, and I'm sure that they would do things differently now. Money was invested in CalPERS. CalPERS was badly managed, very badly managed. They lost $100 million in a week. But Glendale has been a conservative city in the way that they've done their employees, their employee benefits. The employees here do pay a large portion. They pay all of the employee share, which is rare enough if you look at other cities, and they also pay a portion of the employer share. So they've been paying into that. So are there problems? Yes, there are problems. Is this city council serious about addressing those? To the extent that we are able, absolutely. And the fact that this deal it's not a zero deal like you're seeing around the state. This is a contract where the managers are giving back. They're actually giving back concessions or given back what's been negotiated in the past and given to them. And that's not easy to do. And it's really because of them trying to help us solve these problems and recognizing these problems. So you're not going to get an argument from me about the state that California's public pension system is in. But there's only so much we can address here. We can't change CalPERS at the local level. That has to be done from Sacramento. That has to be done through the legal system. To the extent that we can help, I'm sure that we would like to help CalPERS get on their feet economically, but we're not in a position to do that. What we can do is try to make deals with our employees that are fair to them, that allow us to retain good people and to attract good people, to deliver to the public the services that the public expects from the city of Glendale in terms of police officers on the street, firemen, all the public employees that you deal with. And at the same time, these are people that recognize that there are issues and have really been working side by side with us to address that. So I think this is a really good contract. I would ask the people that are critical of this contract to educate me then and to go out and look around the state and look all the way down the list of what cities are negotiating with their employees and to do that comparison and come back. And if we are falling short of what's being done around the state, I would like to hear about it. Because I think that we are actually on the forefront of real reform. So you're not going to get an argument from a lot of us about there being problems with public pensions. But we're doing what we can, and we are in a region where we have cities like Ms. Hammond brought up Burbank. Maybe Mr. Starber can talk about Burbank Water and Power and what they've just done with their employees. So I think our employees here have been great. I mean, they have been working with us every step of the way. What the firefighters did was exceptional, and it really set the bar, I think, for the whole state. The managers have followed suit, and I thank them for that. We're working with our general employees and with our other groups, and I feel very good about where our negotiations have gone. So I fully support this contract. Thank you very much. And Mr. Starbird, do you happen to have any of those numbers about Burbank Water and Power? Or? Okay.
Maybe I will.
Mr. Draymond?
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak, but I think I will. Mostly because I think Councilmember Friedman covered just about everything that was important to me to say. But so I will speak for emphasis only. This is not an easy process. It's very difficult to thread the needle between all the hyperbole on every side of this. I've lived in this city my entire life. I was born and raised, and to hear someone come to the podium and say the city of Glendale is bankrupt. We're not. Far from it. Most municipalities in the county of Los Angeles, in fact throughout the state, would love to be in our shoes. Why? Because when it became clear that we were going to shoulder a portion of the economic brunt of the recession, this city immediately began taking steps to ensure that our budgets would continue to be balanced and that there would be a high level of public service provided to our residents. And that is exactly what has happened. I'm not going to argue with my old friend, Mr. Hoffman. He's entitled to his views, and he's quite right. We shouldn't be sitting up here just in a willy-nilly fashion saying, if we disagree, you're just wrong, and so on and so forth. But that's really not what's happening here, Mr. Hoffman. What's happening here is that there's just been a concerted effort since the Bell issue came to light of people coming to the podium, not many, but a few, we've heard some of them tonight, saying why the city of Glendale is just filled with scoundrels, why just look at Bell. Or the budget situation in Glendale is just terrible, look at Bell. Now, you may look at that and say, gee, Bell's in trouble, but Bell is Bell and Glendale is Glendale. And to say that the city of Glendale has a history of, or this council has departed from a history of being extremely fiscally conservative is just crazy. And the reason the public doesn't buy into it, and the reason that those people espousing that have no traction, is because the public understands that that's just hyperbole, it's nonsense. What we've tried to do is create, in these contracts, these MOUs, is to try to craft a partnership with our employee associations to continue what I think is a very high level of care and stewardship of our city on behalf of our residents. Some of the speakers that come forward talk about city employees as though they're the enemy. You know what? Maybe to you they are, but to the vast majority of the residents of this city, they're the folks that pick up the garbage, that pave the streets, that repair the sidewalks, that make this city function. They're, as many of us like to describe them, and it's been said before up here, they are the first responders when it comes to quality of life in the city of Glendale. So whether it's the guy changing the street light in front of your house, or pruning the trees, or providing public safety, we have crafted a very careful partnership with them. I think that's very important. And more importantly than that, it's what the public expects us to do. It is not the common thing. It is not the norm for any union or employee association to roll back benefits, one through collective bargaining, what have you. But that's exactly what's happening here. Not just because, it's because they recognize that this is the role they can play in helping to benefit our citizens. I applaud them for that. It takes courage to do that. And I also applaud our negotiation team as well. So I support this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Quintero.
I also wasn't going to speak, so I'll be brief. I agree with the previous comments. And let me just say, in terms of CalPERS, they're not operating in a vacuum. All pension funds in this country, private, public, et cetera, have all taken tremendous losses. So like everything else, eventually it will come back, and cities and others that participate in the PERS pension system will go on. I mean, this is obviously an international situation that we're involved in. It's funny, human nature. I mean, most of the speakers, they're just determined, let's go to a lower common denominator. That's the bottom line. Don't try to uplift working people. No, hell no. Let's go down. Let's go down. Less for everyone. There wasn't one word by any of these speakers when we were spending, the taxpayers were spending billions and billions of dollars bailing out the Wall Street banks. Not a word. But here we are hammering every weekend at people that are janitors and like you say, change lights and respond to calls, armed robbery at X location. Let's go after them. They're the enemy. But anyway, it's a free country, so anyone can say whatever they want. And I'm also happy that the GMA has gone in this direction.
Thank you. And I wasn't planning on speaking either. However,
we are certainly long-winded when we have nothing to say.
However, the remarks from one of the speakers truly disturbed me. And that is the speaker who urged the city of Glendale to declare bankruptcy in order to avoid its financial obligations. Not only is that wrong, but that's illegal. An entity, whether it's an individual, corporation, or a municipality, cannot choose to file bankruptcy when it is an otherwise solvent and viable entity, individual, or corporation, solely for the purpose of avoiding its financial obligations. In this case, the reference was the financial obligations to the pension funds and to the employees. What further disturbs me is that individual apparently is, if I'm not mistaken, made an announcement of his candidacy for city council. That's disturbing, that someone who is considering city council is not only urging the current council and city leadership file bankruptcy and commit this illegal act. The illegal act is that of fraud, a bankruptcy fraud, but is also urging and extorting the members of the public to vote out any individual who does not follow his request to commit that fraudulent act. I have problems with that from A to Z. I don't want to overstate this issue, but that's just wrong. It's wrong on many levels. You want to discuss the policy issues? We've heard policy issues from Mr. Milano, from Al Hoffman. We may agree, we may disagree. But to urge an illegal act on behalf of a city and to threaten the council members who would otherwise refuse to commit that illegal act is wrong, and it goes beyond a disagreement on policy issues. It is, it borderlines a criminal act, and I don't know if anyone else saw it like that, but that's the way I saw that. And it's deeply disturbing to me that we have gotten to this point where the council is urged to commit crimes and fraud on something that is otherwise a policy issue. That being said, again, thank you to the GMA for their commitment, to their understanding in this time, and for their rolling back their compensation packages 3%, to the leadership of that organization who had to explain all the ramifications to the membership, to the rank and file, we appreciate deeply your commitment to make sacrifices for not the 5 of us sitting here, but to the residents of Glendale. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move AE1 and risk being driven out of office next April.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members: Draymond.
Yes.
Friedman.
Yes.
Caro.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
9A under hearings is Director of Public Works regarding 2010 Congestion Management Program Self-Certification Process, CMP. And 9A1 is resolution finding the City of Glendale to be in conformance with the CMP and adopting the CMP Local Development Report in accordance with Government Code Section 65089.
This is a public hearing, and I will open the public hearing. Let me go briefly to Mr. Zern. I do have a speaker request to speak on this item, but if you can tell us what we're doing and what the issue...
We do every year. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is the annual self-certification of compliance with the congestion management program that we have been a part of. It's been a part of LA County since 1990. And what this particular component does, in addition to other components that we've previously implemented, which is the Transportation Demand Management Ordinance, is the land use tracking, annual land use tracking. So just to boil it down is we report to the MTA the number, the type of development, number of new units, and these then equate into potential additional daily trips. And that combined with our commuter management programs and different TDM programs that we put in place help us to remain compliant and assist the county in its general efforts to bring congestion down.
And this is my understanding, at least from the MTA level, is that this is a prerequisite for all the cities to submit this self-certification in order to receive certain funds that are administered through the MTA.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. Actually, gas tax and any gas tax-related funds or federal funds or state funds through the MTA. You are correct.
Okay, thank you. I do have a speaker card, 2 speaker cards. I have 2 from Herbert Milano, but I'm going to let him speak once. Mr. Milano.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. I thought I was going to be able to get in 6 minutes here. I've read over this report, and it just dawned on me that it's the one report that basically gives us a good summary of what was built in the city during the past year, new construction, new homes, and so forth. And obviously, we know that the greater the number of construction that takes place, be it residential or commercial, the greater the amount of traffic that we would have. Now, recently on business, I've been traveling quite a bit on the 405 freeway. And as I'm driving incredibly slow on that freeway, I ask myself, how did it ever get this way? How did it get so horrifically bad? Now, when I went to UCLA, the traffic was heavy, but it was never to the incredible misery that the people on the West have to suffer throughout all of the traffic region. So how does it happen that year after year, as these reports get submitted, nothing effectively gets done with regard to the issue with traffic congestion? So now let me address it with Glendale. Sure, we can provide this particular report, but how does it turn into policy for the City of Glendale to something that is truly significant and worthwhile pursuing? To me, and I've been asking this question from the Transportation and Parking Commission, why don't we have a measure of traffic during peak hours primarily, and we provide this report, every year? How long does it take to travel from, let's say, San Fernando Road all the way to the freeway on Bryant Boulevard, during peak hours? Let's say at 5:30 in the afternoon on a typical day or during different times of the year, and then provide another measure the same way. That, to me, is a real traffic-type report. It will tell us if it's getting worse or it's getting better. If we come up with new policies with regard to people walking more or taking their bicycles more, we want to see, is that having an impact? But right now, these reports don't tell us that. I know that the traffic in southern Glendale is getting worse. I know that. I know that sometimes on Saturday morning, around 11 o'clock, driving down on Glendale Avenue, is incredibly bumper to bumper. It wasn't like that 20 years ago. It's getting progressively worse. And that means that those numbers have to be translated into some type of policy that basically turns into smoother traffic. And that, I think, is the whole idea here. You know, I'm not against development. What I am against is the type of lack of planning that basically causes the problems that you heard about today. Insufficient parking, gridlock, you know, insufficient parkland, all of these things, they all deal with city planning and quality of life. And I wish that we can turn this data into something more significant. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we, as part of the general plan, is there not a transportation element?
There is.
Is that something that is due to be revisited?
Yes, we are now starting to refer to it as the mobility element, and we're incorporating the mobility element as part of the community plans, and that's one of the big pieces.
And some of the items that Mr. Milano talks about, perhaps not the exact measure, but I know traffic volumes and other things like that are measured and are included in the element.
They would be included as background material and appendices to support the policies that we will recommend.
Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Zern or Mr. Agani, I think I remember in past years we did traffic analysis that showed time element traveling different streets in Glendale depending on the time of day. Didn't we have that in years past? That you
Mr. Mayor,
had something like that.
Members of the council, Councilmember Weaver, we've done different things, and you're referring to some of our peak versus non-peak counts, and we did show some of the average times. Often we'll use a rating system on intersections or segments, AB A to F.
But in other words, you have this information.
We do have.
And the engineers utilize it to make improvements.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, let's make sure that's available for anyone that wishes to.
Absolutely.
I will close the public hearing at this point.
9A1.
Mr. Weaver, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members: Draymond.
Yes.
Friedman.
Yes.
Quintero. Weaver.
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
We can return to oral communications if we're going to take new business at the end of the meeting.
Yes, we'll take new business at the...
In that case, now's a portion for oral communication. Discussion is limited. Time is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Council may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The city manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation and report.
Thank you. Al Hoffman, followed by Harry Zavos.
Mayor Najarian, Councilman and staff, Al Hoffman, resident of Glendale. Well, today I got a big jolt. I got my water bill. Wow. Went up almost $200, and I didn't even change my watering rate. They're on timers, but what is this all about? And I guess it's part of the letter that I got that said I'm going to get a 25% increase, and also smart meters, or the meters are going to be charged. I didn't quite understand that. There's a charge for the meter. So anyhow, this all brings back the memories of a lot of us coming down here complaining about the transfers from the GWP to the general fund over the years. And I believe because we had water rationing, yes, everybody could know that you wouldn't get the same rate anymore. You would be falling short on the income. And that should have been planned for by all the management and GWP. Yeah, we're going to get hit, and we're going to have to save this. So the transfer of funds from the GWP to the general fund over the years has been a problem. And Mr. Weaver, I guess, we all made a mistake by not taking the civil service job when we got out of school. That means we should have all worked for the government, I guess. Wow. I had a choice to make. I chose to work for something that I really cared about. And I never regret the days I spent at JPL from the very first days that the NASA space program started. And that's been a highlight of my life. And yeah, I have to suffer for it, but I enjoyed what I did and I contributed to society, Mr. Weaver. So don't put down my job just because I didn't take a civil service job like you did, the easy way out, I guess. Oh, yeah, I don't have to worry the rest of my life. Yeah, you can keep smiling. And
just like you.
That's fine. Right. Anyhow, I did want to report that I want to preface what I didn't say earlier about my comments. They were only my personal, had nothing to do with the coordinating council. But I do want to state that we're going to have a representative from GWP at our next coordinating council meeting on September 13th at the Boy Scout headquarters on Grandview. I guess it's Highland, or where the Boy Scout headquarters are, across from the Grandview Cemetery. David Myers wrote me today that we're going to have that program for the 13th, and it's timely because they want to talk about the rate structures, and that's really good for us. And I'd like to report another thing, which I think is really great. A couple of weeks ago, the Royal Canyon was here about the problem they're having on the Stewarton Development Project, and I've heard that they're doing the right thing. The neighborhood, they've had meetings, and they're meeting with the owner and the builder and the architect, and they're making changes, and I guess they're going to, this whole thing will be heard on September 1st, is that? But anyhow, progress is being made, and this is great. This is wonderful that that's happening. So we're going to stand by and see how that all goes down, but I'm thankful that the neighbors and the new owner and the architect are all talking and working this thing out. That's how we should do all these projects. That'd be great if we could achieve that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Harry Zavos.
Council, my name is Harry Zavos, and I'm here to comment on the water budget, proposed water budget, which includes within it a $4.2 million transfer of water fees to the general fund. It also includes a proposed rate hike. With that rate hike, the budget will be slightly in balance to the tune of $100,000. GWP figures indicate that without that rate hike, the budget would be $2.2 million in the red. But if that $4.2 million transfer of water fees isn't made to the general fund, that budget would be $2 million in the black without any rate hike. Now, I have sent emails to all councilmen and to the general manager and city attorney's office as to why I have concluded that that rate transfer violates the state constitution. That conclusion is based on 4 pillars. Number 1, those fees are imposed and the transfers are made pursuant to the city's charter authority. Number 2, in 1996, the people through the initiative process added Article 13D to the state constitution, which expressly provides that it applies to all fees imposed, and I want to emphasize this, to all fees imposed pursuant to local governmental charter authority. Article 13D provides that fees for services that are property related are subject to limitations. For example, you can't collect any more fees than what is required to sustain that service. For example, fees that are already collected can only be spent on that service. And in addition, it expressly prohibits the transfer of those kinds of fees for general governmental services and gives as examples of general governmental services police, fire, ambulance, and library services, the kinds of services that are supported by the general fund. In 2006, the California Supreme Court determined that water services are property related. So consequently, the limitations and prohibitions of Article 13D would apply to water fees. Now, in my emails, I have raised two questions in various guises. One, is there legal authority that reconciles the limitations and prohibition of Article 13D with the city's practice of transferring water fees to the general fund? As yet, I have not received an answer. If there is such legal authority, I have requested what it is. Now, unless those two questions are answered, the city is in the position of appearing to be considering a water rate hike in order to transfer funds in violation of the state constitution. Even worse, it undermines its credibility when it asks its citizens to obey its laws. It's not morally persuasive to say, do as I say, not as I do. In this regard, I stand with Mayor Najarian, who indicates the inappropriateness of even advocating the city act illegally. Now, I would ask, with this background, that this council request from the city attorney's office a formal legal opinion which asks if there is any legal authority that reconciles the apparent conflict between Article 13D's limitations and prohibitions with the city's practice of transferring those funds. And I would ask that that legal opinion address the four pillars that I have described to you tonight, and I have described to you in various emails. And if those questions are not answered, I would ask this council to strike the $4.2 million transfer from the water budget and thereby allow a water budget with a $2 million surplus and no rate hike increase.
Thank you. Herbert Milano.
Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council, I want to address in general the issue of the pensions and the pension changes that is impacting the city of Glendale, in particular to the changes that were made in 2001 that started this whole process rolling. Up until 2001, Glendale safety employees were perfectly happy with a 2.5% at, I believe, at 55. That means that they could work until the age of 55, and as soon as 55, they could retire if they worked 30 years and get 75% of their last income, annual income. I think that for many, many years, that was a perfectly satisfactory arrangement. In fact, many employees who were hired in 1971 were perfectly happy with that. All the way through 1991, for 30 years, employees were perfectly content with coming to the city of Glendale under those auspices. But it was changed. And then after it was changed, in 2005, other city organizations decided that they wanted to get in on the action as well, to basically get what the safety employees used to get. So they wanted now, instead of a 2% at 55, 2.5% at 55, meaning they wanted to get, instead of 60% maximum, a 75% of their last pay. And therein lies the problem. Many employees came to the city of Glendale and worked for decades perfectly happy with that arrangement. And in 2001, you made the mistake, an incredible mistake in my opinion, of making it retroactive. All of a sudden you changed the rules. For someone who has worked for 29 years, you handed him an incredible multi-million-dollar benefit when you made that change in 2001. Now the question here is, does anyone really understand what the impact of that is in terms of what it means with regard to the requirement by CalPERS then to build up sufficient assets to pay that additional pension benefit. And that's the issue. The issue is that it came originally from the state of California when this legislature and Governor Gray Davis approved that particular arrangement. And then it seems like every public union in California basically went right after those incredible benefits, and I believe that many people, including some here present, perhaps did not understand the magnitude, the significant magnitude of what that meant. Everyone in private employment, I don't say everyone, just about everyone, is around the defined contribution. Means that we either provide the money and the employer provides the money, and they say, we will provide the money. What happens to those investments is not up to them. Except in government where you actually guarantee what the actual benefit is, the defined benefit. And that's where our problem is. It drives relentlessly every employee and every employer organization to try to push for the highest amount possible for those last year's pay or now the last 3 years' pay. But it will continue. Without regard to what happens in the economy, without regard to what happens to the taxpayer. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars that eventually that money, whether it goes to the employee and then we actually pay it comes from the taxpayer. Now, Ms. Friedman, I want to make a correction because I read those MOUs. And what the city has done with regard to fire and police, it says right there that they add the 9% that used to be part of the employer expense, they add it to the wages, and then they pay it from the wages. You know, it's like, it's by asking you to go to lunch with me, and say, but give me the money, I'll pay for it. At the end of the day, I can say, yes, I paid for it, but in reality, you paid for it. And that is the same situation that we find here. But either way, whether you do it as built as part of the package of your salary, gross pay, and then add it on as part of the additional requirements that CalPERS is now demanding, it is still a huge obligation. And it's an obligation that now gives these employees multi-million-dollar benefits. $3 million, $5 million, $8 million that they can expect for the rest of their lives. That was not the intent. We like and support the employees of the city of Glendale. It's the egregious pensions that we are really concerned about and the impact that it has on the quality of life, because it reduces our ability to be able to have sufficient funds to fund all of the things that these employees eventually would do for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Margaret Hammond?
Good evening again, Your Honor, Mayor, and members of the council, staff, and audience. My name is Margaret Hammond. Something a little on the lighter side. The Glendale Historical Society is going to be partnering with the Parks and Recreation again for Sunday, August the 22nd, the movie in the park. I think it's, and maybe you can help me out, Ms. Friedman. It's Gun Crazy.
That's right.
And I'm not really supposed to be doing this. The person that's supposed to do it was supposed to do it last time, but didn't. Okay. And so I wasn't quite prepared, but I did want to bring it forward. It's going to be held in front of the doctor's house up at Brand Park. And it does feature, what is it, the bank that was up there on Honolulu.
Security Pacific. Security National Bank.
Right. That there was actually, it was filmed there, the hold up, the whole thing. So it's part of the history of Glendale. So that's why it's in Montrose, and I'm hoping it'll be as good as the last one. We really enjoyed that one also. So everybody that wants to come out. We had a pretty good crowd last time, and it was fun. It was a nice evening. One of the things I'd like to say to Mr. Quintero about the auto dealers, if that junk had gone through, those streets would have been closed. That would have been Lomita, Maple, Garfield, Windsor. Now, can you imagine those streets being closed with the Americana where it is now? And those streets would have all been closed. Where would the traffic go? It'd go up and down Louise Street. It'd have to. People going up Louise Street wouldn't be able to go through to Brand, cut over. So, and the same thing, whatever. It would have really been a detriment to traffic in that area. I'd fight that battle again if I had to. The other one that I would like to bring up is about a problem at the 134 going north on Brand. When you get to the corner where the freeway is, a lot of people, it's supposed to be 2 lanes going left, and a lot of people get to that spot and go through. And I've almost been hit a couple of times. They just go straight through, or they try to get over in your lane afterwards. I don't know what you can do about it, but it seems to be a real problem at that corner about it. I don't know how or what. I don't know. They just don't realize the signs are there saying it's left, you got to turn left, but they don't do it. And the other thing is about traffic. One of the worst places is still Glen Oaks. I was driving up there, or a friend of mine was driving, and I was with her. And this man, we were in the second lane over. She was going along at a good speed, 35 miles an hour or something, and the guy on the right of us was also. The man behind him was honking his horn and going nuts. We couldn't figure out what he was doing. He wanted to get over. I don't know what he wanted us to do, take wings and fly. But he was determined he was going to get over and go faster. And he finally did cut around at a point where he could go. But Glen Oaks is really a bad street. That's one of the ones that's really bad. And, of course, the same old story about people on their cell phones. Every time you look at it, it isn't just the people driving. The pedestrians are just as bad. They're talking away and they just walk off the curb and don't pay any attention at all to traffic. And they think you should, watch out for them. They're not watching out for themselves. And I do have another thing, and it's the items that are needed for our men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I have a list, and I'll give it to you. And I've already had some responses, I've said, from the city employees. Quite a bit of response, actually, wonderful. And, people in Glendale are very generous and very caring. They really are. I have getting so much stuff that I'm going to have to make another trip down to the American Legion. And just wonderful things that I know that the guys were hoping to get a really large shipment together for Christmas for them. And these are items that they can't get at the PX, or if they could, they'd be too expensive. So they're really needed for the troops and anybody that wants to help out. The address is on here, the auxiliary of the American Legion down in Newport Beach, or you can call me, and I will be going down, taking a trip down with anything you wish to donate. So thank you very much for consideration.
Thank you. Last speaker is Mike Mohill.
Thank you, Mayor and Jerry. Best for last, huh?
Something like that.
Okay, council members, Mike Mohill, long-term resident of Glendale. Last week, after I spoke about the scandal in the city of Bell, Mayor Najarian said his council and previous councils were the best fiscally responsible and very ethical. To his left sat Councilman David Weaver, only a few months ago was slapped with a $9,000 fine by the California Fair Political Practice Committee for political corruption. Also to his left sat Councilman John Draymond, who called people he did not agree with dumb or wrong-headed, and miraculously ready for his critics with a video from GTV6 to prove he was without error. 2 seats to the right of the mayor sat Councilman Frank Quintero, who has on a number of occasions used his words that were unbecoming of a public official when describing council activists. And let us not forget the other week during the discussion of the quality of life indicators, our mayor comments of Mr. Herbert Milano and Vanguard Weekly Newsletter were so outrageous that his action was unbecoming of the mayor of Glendale. In 2007, I made my first appearance before this dais, and Mayor Najarian was the mayor. Oral communication was the beginning of each council meeting. Council members were full of residents that came here before the dais to discuss the different issues. I even saw small kids in the audience with their parents. Wow, this was democracy in action. In 2008, new Councilman John Draymond became the mayor, and one of his first actions as the mayor was to move oral communication to the end of council meeting. Why? As the time went on, fewer and fewer people bothered to come before the dais. Those who chose to speak often were intimidated and berated by council members. Speakers often had to wait until the wee hours of the evening when city TV viewing and council chambers were almost empty with limited public opinion. The people's hour had been hijacked by the elected officials. In 2009, Frank Quintero decided to continue keeping Draymond's idea of oral communication at the end of council business. Mr. Quintero even went a step further when he said all speaker cards had to be further turned in to the city clerk before they could speak on action items. Another method to reduce the influence of city activists. I have learned through the years the first obligation and responsibility of our council is making sure we have enough money in our treasury to pay for a pension system that is out of control. Therefore, bonds, fees, and taxes are passed without the approval of the voters. While millions of taxpayers live on Social Security, government workers are retiring at age 50 and 55 with full pension and benefits. According to the Bureau of Statistics, on average, public employees' benefits are 70% greater than in the private sector. As a payback to the campaign monies council candidates have received, the second obligation of this council is to ensure city workers have the best daily wages that money can buy. Currently, library hours are shortened, parks are closed early, and expected city services are reduced or non-existent. After the city council has made sure our union workers force has been handsomely taken care of, potholes in the streets are then filled. However, the bloated payroll and pensions continue to take a bigger bite from the general fund each year. Just last month, the manager from the Glendale Water and Power said he had to raise our water rates. Otherwise, Finch, bond rating company, was going to downgrade our revenue bonds to negative from stable. Today, Standard & Poor Rating Services downgraded the beleaguered City of Bell bonds to junk status because of its inability to pay off a looming $35 million debt. Just like the City of Bell, will middle-class Glendale be on life support someday? Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Ms. Friedman.
Mr. Zern, Ms. Hammond has a point. I've noticed the exact same thing. I don't know what's going on at that intersection. When you're heading north on Brand, usually during rush hour, but not always, those two left turn lanes getting onto the highway, for some reason, that one on the right, people are just starting to plow right through and go straight. And not just occasionally, I see it all the time. So I don't know whether it's people aren't noticing that there's a turn lane there and they just get stuck and they go, or whether they're ignoring it, but maybe, I don't know what we can do, but maybe flashing lights or better markings on the road. I don't know, but maybe we can take a look and see if we can do something about it, because it seems to be happening more and more, and I don't quite know why.
We'll take a look.
Thank you.
Mr. Draymond.
I've noticed the exact same thing, and I do think part of it is part of the indicator as to where the lanes are going. What they're doing is what's written on the pavement. You can't see that any longer because the traffic congestion is so bumper to bumper at certain hours of the day that you can't see the directional arrows because they're covered up with cars. But I see it all the time. You're absolutely right. The only thing I wanted to mention, Margaret mentions the movie Gun Crazy, and the big hold-up scene does take place in Montrose, and it's the old Security National Bank, which is today Faze, women's intimate apparel, and if you watch the movie, you'll have some fun. It's nice to see their getaway and their preparation to rob the bank as they drive through Montrose in the 1940s. So it's pretty interesting to take a look at the town and some of the back streets. The other funny thing is, after they hold up the bank, and they jump in their getaway car, and the burglar alarm in the bank is going off, and they're driving away and driving away and driving away. Somehow that burglar alarm must have been in the back seat of the car, because even after they're a quarter mile away, the bell is still ringing. So take a listen to that. It's really a crazy kind of movie. It was a film noir, interesting, that delved in, one of the early films that delved into these psychological aspects of why people commit crime.
Is that the movie they just showed a few months ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley also showed it about less than a year ago as well.
Mr.
Thank
Weaver.
Mrs. Alvos, I'll answer the non-legal part of your question. I did some more checking, and I spoke to it here under council comments some weeks ago. We put a water rationing on because we had to use less water, and so we were short. Now, you can say, well, if you didn't transfer the $4 million. Well, the penalty that the MWD was going to put on the city of Glendale if they maintained their acre footage of water that historically we have used, the penalty would have been in the multi-million dollars, far exceeding the $4 million we would have had. We would have been further in debt, using up all our limited water reserves for maintenance of the existing facilities. So there was no choice. We had to lower the usage of water, and to make up the difference, we had to put on the additional fee, which coupled with the $4 million would have kept us okay. But MWD was going to take us for $8-10 million per year. So that was the reason for that. Mr. Hoffman, I have nothing but utter respect for JPL. I never said that I was putting down private sector. Private sector's made this country. Public sector is the one that's helped maintain it and give it all the amenities that we enjoy. And as far as pensions, well, it'd be nice to have hindsight. That we could see this coming 10 years ago. We've heard a lot of talk first about a year ago or two, the attacks on the police department. Then it shifted over to attacks on the fire department. Then I forget what else we gravitated to, but then in the past 5-6 months, it's now pensions. And gee, if only we knew everything today, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have made maybe some of these horrendous mistakes. But we're only human. We can only react to information and stuff we have at the time. To now stand up and accuse us, you didn't know what you were doing. Councils at that time made the best decisions they could possibly make based on what they knew. And that's what we do here today. 10 years from now, some people can look back on this council and say they didn't know what they were doing. Why did they do it? That's easy to say all the time. I'm sorry they feel that they have to continue to attack on this pension thing, especially since this city is doing more than virtually any city in the state to address that issue, and has been. And other cities know that. Thank you.
Yeah, for the record, I wanted to let everyone understand that Maple and Lomita would not have been closed under that cul-de-sac plan that would have protected the residential neighborhoods. And then to the speaker that talked about, gee, I'm not getting enough camera time. Keeping track of Mr. Milano's time, I think he might have spoken as much as 45 minutes in this session that started at 6 o'clock. I don't think any of us spoke 45 minutes. So I think in that particular case, the speaker probably outdid us, and that's the way it usually is. So I've said once again that when someone comes to that podium, and it's not someone that's here every meeting, we bend over backwards to listen to them, to follow through with their questions, et cetera, et cetera. So for the same folks that show up every week and speak for 45 minutes on every topic under the sun. I guess human nature being what it is, you have a tendency to sort of, well, that's as far as I'm willing to go tonight.
Thank you.
Message understood.
Mr. Starburn.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, at the risk of prolonging the comments, I do need to correct an item raised by Mr. Milano that he put forth as a fact, which is inaccurate, and that is that the employees pay the 8%, which is the employee's portion of PERS, but in effect the city just adds that onto their salary so they can pay it. That is inaccurate. That is not how it works. In fact, Glendale probably takes the most transparent and above-board approach to both the payment of the employees' and employers' portion of PERS and the statement of what salaries are for employees than any city in the state of California, because the vast majority of cities in the state of California, the city pays the employee's contribution to the retirement system, and then frankly gives one compensation figure to PERS for retirement purposes and publishes a different figure when they go out to advertise for people to fill a position. In Glendale, the employee pays the 8%, and the same salary that is reflected to the public is reported to PERS. What does happen is that when we do a survey periodically to see if we were being competitive, we look at a number of factors that are the city's cost of providing salary and benefits. One of those is who's paying the retirement costs. I think every city that we compare with, the city pays the employee's contribution to the retirement system of, let's say, 8%. Well, if you ignore the fact the city's paying that, then you're not doing a fair apples-to-apples comparison of what that employee's services are costing the city. So what we do is we make an adjustment in those surveys so that we are comparing apples to apples with respect to key cost components like salaries, the contributions to retirement, health costs, and a number of other specific components that go into making up an employee's total compensation. So if the other cities in the survey happen to pay the employee's share, 8%, and the city in Glendale, City of Glendale, requires the employee to pay that, that's taken into consideration as we look at total compensation. Now, I would imagine, inasmuch as we have not had pay increases for now going into 3 years, and I know there are some cities in those comparison groups that have had pay increases, the likelihood is when we do a comparison next time, if and when we do one, could be a long ways off before we do, but when we do, we will find that Glendale has fallen behind in terms of total compensation. And that's how the 8% comes into play. We do not just tack it onto the employee's salary. In this city, the employee pays the employee share. The employee now will pay a portion of the city's contribution. The salary that we reflect to the public is the same salary that we report to PERS, a very transparent and above-board approach way to do it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Quintero, do you have some new business?
Yes, I have some new business. I move that the Council of the City of Glendale hereby authorize the city attorney to file an answer and any other pleadings as necessary in the case of San Diego County Water Authority versus Metropolitan Water District of Southern California et al., case number BS 126888, in support of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and to incur necessary expenses in connection therewith.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond.
Yes.
Friedman.
Abstain.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We're adjourned.